Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be. For all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth, welcome to Vestiges After Dark. And I'm your host, Bishop Bryan Willett, coming to you live from the deep woods of western Georgia on this November 22nd, 2022. Tonight, it's your favorite show, Open Lines, Open Topics, and you've got Jamie Wolfe, Father Chris Yates, and myself all to yourself for 3 hours, taking your questions, your comments, and your stories. Jamie Wolfe is actually on location right now. She's not with me in the studio, so she does not have eyes on the chat. That burden is all on Father Chris tonight. So if you want to give Father Chris a break, call into the show with your questions, if you can. We'll still be taking questions from the chat room, but it'd be better if you call in this show, okay? And it is the season finale, so let's go out with a bang. Don't go away. I am so happy that you have joined us or decided to join us this evening on this holiday week for those of you in the U.S. For our last show of the season. We'll be coming back, of course, next year with a whole new, larger, longer season with new guests and new adventures. So, we're not disappearing off the face of the earth, but we do take Advent off. It's my kind of sabbatical time each year to get myself spiritually centered at the beginning of the liturgical year. And it's kind of my favorite time of year. So I kind of focus myself, and I don't really take cases in December. And with, Thanksgiving right around the corner here, it's kind of a good time to close up. So I really wanted to do 10 episodes this season. That just did not pan out. I apologize for that. But we'll make it up in season 7, and hopefully season 7 will be a blessed, sacred season instead of the cursed season that season 6 was, where we had a problem just about every single episode. Maybe we can change that kind of mood tonight. Let's see how it goes. So far, the frame rates are great. Stopping simulcasting was definitely the right choice, even though we do have occasional buffering throughout the show, as you've seen. It isn't unmanageable. It doesn't cut us off. It doesn't force us to have to start up the stream again, which creates all sorts of logistical nightmares for me while I try to host the show and sound somewhat coherent. What's really kind of difficult too is, I used to be a night owl, but ever since I moved to this house, for some reason, I can't sleep past 8:30 in the morning. Sometimes I'm getting up at like 5. And I never did that before moving to this house. I always would sleep about, I'd stay up late, usually about 2 or 3 in the morning, and then I'd wake up about 10. That was my usual routine. So it made doing this show a lot easier at night. But when I'm getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning, I'm a little more tired than I usually would normally be. Hopefully that's not coming through. But you tell me. But we've got, before we get started with tonight's Open Lines, Open Topics, starting to take your questions and everything else, I have questions and comments from the ether. And then we'll jump right in here for the next 3 hours and have a lot of fun. Okay. So this one is a good one. Again, I try to pick ones that are relevant to everybody, because a lot of questions that I get asked are really kind of, things that are on, I think, a lot of people's minds. And I try to pick those. I try to pick ones that I think that, well, first of all, I can tell because I get questions that I get asked a lot. And then sometimes I just get asked questions that are so good that I know it's something that might have crossed people's minds, but they've never thought to ask it. And I think that is the category for today's question. And this came in from Marina. It actually came in last night. And it was a great question on the Nicolaitan Network. And she asked, "Hi, Bishop. I'm curious to know what your answer to this question is that I've seen online. The question pertains to the salvation of those who died and did not have the opportunity to learn about Jesus and the gospel. In the icon of the resurrection, we see that Christ saves the righteous in Hades, but what about those after the resurrection who never heard the gospel? I know one answer is that they will be granted mercy, but there's the argument that then we would lose our motivation for evangelism. Also, if people who never hear the gospel are automatically saved, then one could argue that it would be best that they don't ever hear the gospel, because then there would be a chance they will reject it and be condemned. I have some ideas to this question, but I'd love to know yours. Thanks." It's a great question, fantastic question, and I'm going to read my reply, as usual, the one that I typed up on the network, and then I will elaborate for those of you who are listening, because you might not have seen this. If you're not on the network, you definitely didn't see it. Okay, so this was my answer. Salvation is possible for those who have never heard the gospel, but this is where the works part of faith and works becomes very important. Not that it's not always important, but it's like really, really super important when you're talking about this, okay? All right, so the church teaches that all men and women are created with the desire to find God, even if many prematurely give up searching for him. And it also teaches that God finds us wherever we happen to be at within our lives, okay? So that means that we were created with the instinct to seek him out. And God will always find us wherever we happen to find ourselves in life, as long as we're looking for him. The problem is people give up prematurely, or they are lacking in the fortitude and the perseverance that's required for spiritual pursuits. And a lot of that has to do with modern distraction. It was a lot easier when you didn't have social media, television, movies, internet, 7-day-a-week jobs that are very demanding on one's, mind. And of course, you've got family obligations, and you've got all sorts of other things that distract us from. And it was not that the ancient world didn't have their distractions. They did. They had disease running rampant. You had political systems that were very tyrannical. We think that our government today is tyrannical. Really, we have it pretty good compared to the ancient people. Particularly if you were a Jew living in under the Roman Empire. If you were a Roman, you lived pretty good, but the Jews kind of had it rough. They have always had it rough, I think. Always. Their whole story has been very difficult, I think. So, so if you were one of these gospel writers, you knew what it was like to be to have it difficult. So it's easier to find God. Today, we're distracted. So I go on and say the church also teaches that the grace to find God is given to all who cultivate it. Okay, that's important too. That there's a grace that God bestows on those to find him. And this is the most important part. This applies to everyone, regardless of whether or not they have been exposed to the gospel. Everybody gets access to this grace if they're seeking it. And this grace is contained within every religious worldview. Every single one. Even outside of religious worldviews. It can be found in the philosophical ones as well. The grace is there, okay? And it's accessible. It can be cultivated from anywhere. It doesn't have to be just strictly from the gospel or the Christian religion. Okay? But to be clear, salvation in this case is only possible. It is not automatic. Right? Just because they weren't exposed to it doesn't mean that, you're off the hook. Oh, no, you still have to cultivate a relationship with God, because you might not have heard the gospel, but I guarantee you have some idea of divinity in your life. And there's no excuse for rejecting that. Okay, so even if you're not Christian, even if you've never heard the gospel, You've been exposed to spirituality. It's innate within you. Okay? And Christ can be found there, but not perfectly. And that's the caveat that we'll get to in a minute here. So, to be clear, salvation in this case is only possible. It is not automatic. The effort to find God must still be invested within whatever religion or worldview one has access to. So then comes to the second part of her question. Is it better to never hear the gospel? No, it's not. And I'll explain why. Because the gospel makes this process infinitely easier. It's a direct path to God. It leaves nothing to chance. And it can be said that the formula it outlines for salvation makes it assured for those who actually apply what it teaches. It really does guarantee salvation as long as you apply what it teaches. Problem is, none of us are applying it perfectly. Not me, not you, not anyone, not the Pope. No one is applying this perfectly. That's the problem. And that's why you can never say or be so arrogant as to assume that you've got salvation, which is why I hate this evangelical trend to say, oh, what, are you saved? How the hell do I know if I'm saved? I hope I'm saved, but I'm not going to go arrogantly saying that I am just because I declared something. So you're never really sure. But if you applied the gospel perfectly, assuming you could, it would assure your salvation. It does, okay? But to be clear, salvation, as it pertains to the gospel, is a formula, okay? It's a formula for finding God, the most perfect one that was ever given. And while it can also be said to those much, it can also be said that when Jesus says to those much is given, much is expected, which could mean that those who know the gospel are under a much higher obligation than those that have never heard the gospel, I still wouldn't want to take less responsibility for a more difficult and perilous spiritual path to salvation. Okay, so she asked, she thanked me, Marina thanked me, and then she kind of wanted to clarify her, and she says, is it kind of like why travel to a destination using trial and error and on foot when you could have a map and a car? Kind of, but my analogy, I think, makes it a little bit more clear. It's more like, why take an airplane all the way around the world just to get to your neighboring city when you could get in your own car and drive there yourself down the highway and get there directly and not have to go all the way around and depend upon a plane that could be very expensive, very time consuming, a lot of hassle, and might not get you exactly where you want to go. No responsibility. I mean, if the pilot crashes the plane, it's not your fault. You've crashed your car. That's your fault. So yes, greater responsibility to drive yourself in your own car, but a lot more efficient. And so I look at the gospel as driving yourself there. Okay. It's a direct path. And those that have been exposed to the gospel are very fortunate that God has gifted them with this wonderful grace to be able to utilize the gospel in this way, because it is essentially an absolute roadmap to heaven. It's essentially what it is. It's a roadmap to God. And there's no religion that has anything quite like that. None. And that's because there's no religion where God came to us other than Christianity. All religions are us seeking God. All these other religions are us reaching out to God. This is why, after my practicing all these different religions, and I practice them all. I practice them all. This is why I came back to Christianity and I never left again. It's because after having exposed myself and found that there isn't a better way, that this is the most perfect way, that I couldn't ever try to, it wasn't logical to try to do it another way. So I hope that answered her question, and I hope it kind of kicks us off for tonight, because it is a very interesting philosophical question. I know that a lot of people think that, culpability plays a role here. Culpability is less important in this respect. Where the culpability lies in salvation is what effort you're putting in. And God will find you where you're at. So again, if you are like this child born into some remote tribe somewhere in the rainforests of South America and never having had exposure to the gospel, although that's kind of hard to believe these days, but there's probably some out there that haven't seen it yet. Does that mean they get an automatic ride without having to do any of the work that the Christian religion requires of them, not having to apply any of the faith that's required, not having to know Jesus in that direct way. No, because they still have to apply their spirituality, and they definitely have one. Okay, all cultures have a spirituality, even if our secular world is trying very hard to destroy that. It will never, it's built into us. Okay, this is why politics and science are replacing or trying to replace religion in our culture today. This is why, because we're wired for religion. And when you're not allowed to practice religion, then what ends up happening is that you start to apply it in different ways. You find another way to release that need. And it's a need. Maslow should have put it right up there, right? Or actually right at the bottom. You know, I mean, the bottom of the pyramid where he had food and sex, it should have been food, sex, religion. Because you need it. You need it. And it's not all, self-actualization is just the ultimate end goal of all those things. But religion is part of our wiring. It's part of who we are. And when you reject this, you fall into problems. This is why we're seeing societal problems today and why it's falling apart, because you don't have anything that binds us together anymore. Not under a rule of law, not under a moral code, although that's always part of keeping consistency, but just simply the fact that we are defying our nature by rejecting religion. We're defying our nature. We're defying how we were designed. And that's very problematic. And that leads to all sorts of issues. And we can talk more about that tonight. So joining us from Australia, and like I said, Jamie Wolfe's out there too, not in Australia, but she's not in state. We have Jamie Wolfe and Father Chris Yates with us. How are you guys doing tonight?
Hey, good evening, everybody, from the plains and farmlands of West Central Illinois.
Illinois, all right, close to Chicago.
And,
about 2 hours.
2 hours, okay.
No.
Greetings from Newcastle, Australia. I was going to say, if Jamie was in Australia, she hasn't called me.
Oh, you'd be the first person to call, trust me. I'd be right from the airport.
I've been getting you from the airport, that's right.
Right.
We've been asked about libations. I have made myself an iced coffee because
nice.
I don't like the canned stuff because I don't like sugar, basically. So, and it's not because I'm sweet enough. I'm not sweet at all, but I just don't like sugar. So I make it just a double espresso on ice with a bit of milk.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be honest with you.
Man.
I do find the processed, like the prepackaged coffee drinks to be far too sweet. When I make my own, cappuccinos and lattes, I just put a hint of usually cocoa butter with it's basically a cocoa butter syrup. That is predominantly cocoa butter.
Very, very good flat white, might I add.
Oh, yes, I did. I made you a flat white. That's right. Yeah,
you did.
Yeah. So, I agree with you. I think that people make coffee way too sweet. It does not need to be that sweet. You kind of want a little edge to your coffee. And I find that when it's too sweet, it doesn't wake me up as much, which is strange because you think that the sugar would give me more energy. But I find that I need to taste the coffee. Maybe it's something psychological about that.
But I was once base liaison officer for the Canadian Defence Force in London when I was in the police. And they used to put salt in their coffee.
I put a pinch of salt in mine.
Yeah, I've heard
a pinch of salt in the percolator.
Butter.
Yeah.
In the percolator. Interesting. Yeah.
Apparently it takes the bitterness out.
Oh, so I can see
all
that.
I know is it keeps you drinking it.
People can do that. If you're drinking a wine, this is something that a lot of people don't know about. If you're drinking a wine and, typically if you're buying a good wine, this is not an issue. But if you're buying a wine that's kind of in that moderately priced range where it can go either way, it might be good, might not be that great. Maybe it's kind of young and, maybe it didn't fully mature and it's got that edge, that nasty edge, and you're not eating with it. Now, typically food will soften that. So wines that are like that can usually become very drinkable as soon as you start bringing food into the mix because they can complement each other. But what it is about food is actually the savoriness that creates the improvement in the flavor of the wine. So you can actually simulate this by putting a little bit of table salt on your tongue and then drink your wine after that. And that will actually condition your tongue to taste some of the softer flavors in the wine that are kind of lost or.
Salt really is amazing stuff. There's been a war on salt for the past 30 years. You should ignore it. It's like the war on butter. Ignore it.
Yes.
Put butter,
I
put
use
salt in
butter
your food.
and salt in my coffee, and I use butter and salt on my red meat.
Everything.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I do too. And it's like I don't. My grandmother had high blood pressure, and she was because of the scare tactics that the medical profession has used over the years. She thought that salt caused her high blood pressure, and. No, I mean, she was just genetically
Lots of
predisposed.
people think that.
They do.
Yeah.
So
Well,
she wouldn't put salt on anything. So her cooking, which was actually, she was a Polish immigrant.
Yeah, right.
So they could cook. I mean, her pierogies were amazing, but nothing had any flavor because she refused to put salt on it. And if you tried to put salt on, she'd grab the salt shaker out of your hand and run back into the kitchen with it. So I grew up hating her cooking, because it didn't taste like anything. And so
a lot of people don't realize that salt makes something sweeter.
Yeah.
So like if you put salt in tonic water, for example, you can try this at home. If you put salt in tonic water, it'll taste like you've just put a spoonful of sugar in it.
Yes. Yeah.
It sweetens it.
It does. And if you take that tonic water and you put it under ultraviolet light, it glows because of the quinine.
Oh yeah, quinine. Yeah.
Now I have to do that.
That's the only reason I drink it. It's because of the terrible malaria in Australia.
Well, they say it's good for COVID too, so maybe that's why you don't get COVID.
It's good for everything.
Maybe that's why you never catch it.
It's good for everything.
It's literally a tonic.
I don't drink enough gin and tonics. I guess I think I've caught COVID about 3 times, but it's it's just been a cold to me, so I've been.
That's
very
all right.
fortunate.
I drink your ration for you.
Oh, thank you. Well, no, I actually do like gin and tonics. I just don't get around to it.
Well, I'm English. It's the only truly English drink.
It actually is, and I mean, I love a good gin. There's not really a gin that I have not liked, but I've got some. I think my favorite ones are actually Scottish gins.
I was going to say, like a lot of the Islay distilleries are making gin now.
Yeah, they are, and they're good.
Mind you, everyone's making gin now. It's everywhere.
It's becoming back in. It's coming back in. Yeah, it's coming back into vogue. It falls in and out. These liquors falling out. Whiskey's always big, it seems, but there's times where like rum's more popular, then it goes to vodka, then it goes to gin and tequila. Then it circles back around. But whiskey's always like the godfather of them all.
That's true.
Yeah, whiskey never goes out of style.
Yeah, it never goes out.
No.
Yeah.
And what are you drinking, Jamie?
I was drinking a Sazerac rye. And,
Nice.
It's empty. It's empty now. So
Did you pick that? Did you pick that up
refill.
at the liquor store up there?
Yeah, and I did find you some Buffalo Trace.
Oh, wonderful! But I'm guessing they didn't have Hine Antique. I'm guessing.
No, sir, they did not.
I did. It's hard to find.
Right.
I am drinking a. What am I drinking? Oh, this is a Tuscan. A Tuscan. It's a super Tuscan. We had Italian tonight, so this is the remnants of that bottle. Not much left, but it'll get me through the first quarter, the first segment here. So.
The first hour.
The first hour. So, okay. So, Father Chris, you're going to have to be the one that keeps eyes on the chat room for questions because
I am doing that.
Okay.
Sorry, Father, I'm on the cell phone.
No, that's fine. I did have a sort of reflection on the question from the ether as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's hear it.
Something that people are interested in. I think there's actually 2 categories that are important, and you definitely mentioned both of them. One is actually what people mean by salvation itself, and I'll come to that second, because I think the little taster is to say, I think some people see it as, is it the golden ticket that Willy Wonka gives you? And I think that is a very flawed view of what salvation means, and it's why when the question asked by particularly Protestant Christians, and I'm not picking on them, it's just there's a philosophy underpinning all of this. Is, are you saved? And I've touched on this before. Metropolitan Callistos, where when asked that question by a Protestant, said, I am being saved.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so, and that process doesn't end.
No.
Beyond death.
It does.
So it never ends. Otherwise, we'd have no meaning to our lives. So I think that's one. There's a category kind of difference between what some people are meaning by salvation and what some aren't, and it's how you can see a narrowing that comes with how you get hold of the golden ticket, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So it makes sense. I'm not picking on them. I'm just saying that these things hold together. That people think a certain way because of a scaffold of other ways of thinking that lead there, right? So, but to come to the fundamental question of what about people who haven't heard the gospel? It begins, as you said, that Christianity, and I would even argue Judaism, a close reading of Judaism says, no, God comes looking for us.
Yeah.
He's the hand of heaven. Yeah. So because, and again, for Protestants, it's perfectly biblical. In the book Genesis, when Adam and Eve sin, they hide from God. So they hide from God, and God says, where are you, Adam? Where are you, my son?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So from all creation, God is searching for you.
Yes.
Okay. And we're all created in the image and likeness of God. And it's that created likeness within us that orientates us towards God. So now I'm going to talk about something called the anonymous Christian, which I think is this is by Karl Rahner, who was a Catholic theologian, was a significant contributor from a theological perspective to the Second Vatican Council. Mm-hmm. And he came up with this doctrine of the anonymous Christian, which was partly an answer to the question, in a post-colonial age, how do we go about propagating the gospel? Because clearly going and bashing people on the head and saying, right, now you're a Christian.
Yeah, it's not going to go over so well. Yeah, it's not go over so well then either.
It's against the nature of Christianity, isn't it? Because Christianity is about freedom and free choice. And that's why Christian nations tend to be the most free nations.
Isn't that ironic?
Yeah, that's right. And so who would have thought it? Yeah. And so, what Karl Rahner posited was, again, based on this image from Genesis, also based upon the image of St. Paul, who went to the Areopagus in Athens to speak to the Greeks, who were wise and philosophical, and they loved him. And on the way there, he said, you have a shrine to the unknown God. And I'm here to tell you who that God is. You're very wise. You know that there is a God that you do not know, and I'm going to tell you who he is. And he's Jesus Christ. Mm. Okay? So this is actually a very, very good evangelistic tool. That's what you should do. Yeah. Rather than saying how terrible, how disordered people's lives are, therefore you need Jesus, right? And that's why, again, all of this holds together. That's why you tend to get these extraordinary stories of, and I'm not knocking it. Hey, right. Thank God. But, where they say, I was a drug addict, I was on the streets, I was a prostitute, then I found Jesus and now my life's turned around and I'm happily married and I've got a job and everything's wonderful. They're great stories. And actually there is absolutely, that's the power of Christ at life and work in somebody's life. Yeah. But you don't need to have been on the streets. You don't need to have been in a sort of Hollywood rock bottom moment. We all have our own moments. Yes. And I think there's a sort of inverse pressure to say I was really terrible and now I'm really good. Right. That's not
They're both forms of egotism.
Well, absolutely they are. Yeah. And so, so St. Paul goes there. Of course, the stumbling block was when he mentioned the crucifixion, and they went, "Oh my God, we were listening to you until you just said this wonderful thing, this God that came to earth, but that he died on a cross. Get out of here!" Right? Right. So that was too much for them. Yeah. But Karl Rahner was harnessing these two principles, and what he said was essentially what you were saying at the beginning of the show, Bishop, which is that natural inclination to cooperate with God is in fact goodness. That's what goodness is, yes. Is to do God's will. Yeah. Okay. So if through no fault of our own, we're never exposed to the gospel of Christ, but within the revelation of God in our lives, we cooperate with that, with God to be as good as we possibly can be, then we are in fact saved. We're saved through Christ because there is only Christ. Right. Christ is God. Right. And therefore we're actually already Christians, but we don't know it. Hence the term anonymous Christian. Right. And therefore the job of the Christian church is to name it. So we go around naming the unknown God that's saving these people, and it is Jesus Christ. So it satisfies the necessity to say there's only salvation through Christ, because we do believe that. That is a Christian absolute. Salvation is only through Christ. But it doesn't say it's only through Christ in a particular way.
Right.
And so, but it gives the imperative to the church to say, but we do have a job to do to go around saying, this is the true revelation of God in Christ. And this salvation has been achieved for you through the passion and the resurrection of Christ. And then it goes on to the second point, which is, what's the purpose of salvation? Well, salvation is a process. The purpose of salvation is that we grow in our cooperation with God.
Right.
So theosis, right? So we're growing in godliness in our own lives, and therefore to say, so why would you tell? There's a famous meme of a Native American. Am I saved without you telling me about the Bible? Yes. Well, then why tell me?
Right.
And it satisfies some people who are naturally against wanting to cooperate with the church. The point is to say, no, there is a reason to tell that person, because the point of life, the meaning of life, is to become more like Christ. And therefore, yes, somebody might be saved in their natural state, but now here is the opportunity to understand more perfectly and much more adequately what it means to be good. Because the ultimate goodness is revealed in the God-man, Jesus Christ.
I think what it comes down to really is just the simple fact that people have not over the years either, one, taught or instructed well in the meaning of these things, or two, used the ignorance of people to manipulate them to a specific end. For example, the church teaching at its time, it doesn't teach it this way anymore, but it did at one time, that there was no salvation outside the church, which is actually true. Now they explain what they mean by that. But before, they used to use it as a weapon and say, you're not part of the Catholic Church. Oh, you're damned.
You're out.
And that's not at all what that even means. What it means is the church is salvation. So yes, obviously outside of the church, there can't be any salvation. But what's not being fully understood by people who are not familiar with the theology is that the church spans a much greater circumference of reality than just life here on this earth. We have the church triumphant. We have the church suffering. These are parts of the church that exist in those states after death. And it would be safe to say, as Mother Angelica used to say, that when you die, God's not done with you yet. It isn't this. This is it. This is your only chance. You better, declare Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Otherwise, you're shit out of luck. That has never been the Christian theology. That's not at all how it works. But it's been taught that way because it's not so much anymore, because people just are so apathetic. They just don't give a damn anymore. But before they lost this, before they acquired this newfound postmodern apathy that we see, it was a good tool for scaring people into salvation. Did it have merit? I don't think so.
It knitted together with the theology of predestination. So, the idea, this is Calvinist, as opposed to Calvin. Calvinist, John Calvin was not a Calvinist. Okay,
I would say Martin Luther wasn't a Lutheran either.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
He was a Catholic through and through. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but Calvinism reaches this point, and Episcopalians, Anglicans have this weird relationship with it, right?
Yeah.
So, but they have double predestination, which is kind of crazy. But anyway, not that most Episcopalians or Anglicans believe any of their founding documents anymore, or even know what they are.
Right.
But predestination suggests that you've been predestined by God before you were placed in your mother's womb, whether you would be saved or not. And so now a sign of this predestination, the sign of your predestined salvation, is that you can say Jesus is Lord, that you come to faith.
Yeah.
And therefore, that's why you get this moment, why in Protestant circles they have this altar calls, or they call them altar calls, but they have an altar. But anyway, but they have the, come to the front and give your life to Christ. Now, again, I'm not saying they shouldn't do that. Right. I think there's something very powerful in somebody doing such a thing.
Sure.
But what I don't believe is that in that moment they are saved. I don't believe that. I believe that they were on the path to salvation for a long time, and they will continue on that path beyond this life and into the next. And so like I say, it has an internal cohesion. But as you said, because people are way less engaged in actual theology anymore. I mean, they go to a church because they like the pastor, or they like the music, or the friends are there, or who knows. But what it isn't is that they're saying, I go to the Baptist church because I like what Zwingli had to write and I agree with what he said. Yeah. Not many people are doing that anymore. No. Even the clergy. Yeah. Or Presbyterians are saying, I appreciate Calvin and Calvinists doctrine, Calvinistic doctrine, so I'm going to follow that. Very few are in that camp now. And partly you can see the effect of Karl Rahner's Anonymous Christian, which I've only given you a snapshot of, on the Catholic Church, because post Vatican II, they called it the opening up of the church, right? Opening up to the world. That's very much the good side of that is very much nourished by that way of thinking, of saying there is no salvation outside of the church, but what we have considered the church before is not the fullness of what the church is.
Correct. That's exactly right.
And we've been polemical at worst and slack at best at how to communicate.
Well, and they don't understand, and I think even clergy are guilty of this, not understanding or not being mindful, perhaps. So it's maybe not so much a lack of understanding as it is a lack of mindfulness, a lack of attention to detail. But the reality is that not only is it that the church isn't a complete picture, or that we haven't given a complete picture of the church. That's much larger than what we think. But it also applies to the role of the church, which is to be idealistic. So obviously it is always going to teach the ideal, the perfect ideal. It's going to teach perfection in its idyllic state. And it should. Even if it's unattainable. And it doesn't, they never wanted to talk about that part. You can't get to this point, but we still have to teach it. If it had just been taught this way, I think, to the baby booming generation, you wouldn't find that they would have dropped off in such large numbers, because they were sick and tired of going to Catholic school and having erasers thrown at their head, being beaten by nuns to believe something that is truly unattainable. And what does that sound like? Well, it sounds a lot like the legalism that St. Paul was criticizing throughout all of his epistles. It was the same mentality, just carried on. And it doesn't work, and it drives people away, and it leads to ignorant
in some ways
perceptions.
I think that's right, because it pretty much died with the boomers, right?
It did. Yeah. Prior to that, wasn't an issue.
But I think in a way that's the end of the Reformations.
Yeah.
But do you know what I mean? Like, they played out beyond. People talk about the Reformation as though it was one thing. We should talk about reformations within the church. In fact,
absolutely.
The church is in constant reformation, really. But there should be. And that's not because the eternal truth changes. It's because our relationship with them changes.
Right.
And so, but really, that it went from in the West, the kind of the initial complaints that Luther and the like were making about the excesses and the nonsense of selling indulgences and all of those things, which the Catholic Church have completely agreed with. Okay. Yeah. And even at the time couldn't defend doctrinally.
Right.
Don't forget, Luther wrote to the then Pope saying, "Oh, Holy Father, I don't think you know what's going on." His assumption was that there's no way that this could have been sanctioned.
He had no desire. Luther had no desire to break or create schism. I'm convinced of that.
No, and I'm also convinced he believed in one church.
Yeah.
But that's by the by. But so then we get this sort of wrangling that's both theological and political, because church and state were too close together. We don't seem to learn this mistake. Because when politics becomes your religion, then church and state are fused. But anyway, there's a doctoral thesis there. But really, the Reformations carry on, and it ends up by the time of the boomers. So this is going forward 500 years in time, right?
Right.
By the time of the boomers, it's basically saying, "Oh, we're a Protestant family, we're a Catholic family, we're a Baptist family, whatever."
Right.
And it's actually a sort of one amongst many identities,
right?
Rather than actually being a faith that's practiced, which is why actually they don't know what their founding doctrines are. They don't know the theological forces behind it. If I said Zwingli to a lot of Baptists, they wouldn't know what on earth I was talking about, because it just became another part of your identity. And as soon as that happens, then actually, true religion, true religious engagement, which is essential in life. You are religiously engaged with something, whoever you are.
Oh, yeah.
So true religious engagement in the life of the church, which is essential, actually stops happening, which is why that generation, including my parents, our children can choose for themselves, and then gave us nothing to choose between.
Nothing to choose with. Yeah, no tools to work with. How could you choose? No.
Yeah,
I hear that too all the time. I'm not baptizing my child because I want them to choose. Like baptism, what chooses for them?
People used to say that to me when I was a parish priest in the Anglican Church, and I'd say, "So what options are you giving them to choose between?"
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, "Oh my God,
I'm not giving them anything."
Don't ask me that. I said, "Well, how about bring him here? Then they can choose that or not."
Right? Yeah, makes sense.
They can choose or reject it, can't they? Once they know it.
Well, we are taking questions tonight, and we'll take it from the chat room. Father Chris is watching, but if you could call in, that would be better.
It's all about food at the moment.
It's all about food? Okay.
In the chat room.
Well, we can talk about food.
You can tell that's our people in the chat room if we're talking about food.
Yeah. Remember, this show doesn't have to be paranormal or spiritual, religious, or anything about anything. But the number to call is 347-514-7150. That's 347-514-7150. You can enter PIN number 3768923 to get put into the queue. Okay, so once you dial that number, it'll ask you for the PIN number. Just enter 3768923. I'll put you in there. I've got it up on the screen right now. International callers can call free by using Skype. Just call me on Eye of the Seer, eyeoftheseer. That'll get you connected on Skype. And we have a call already coming in from the 931 area code, which I think is a Tennessee phone number, although sometimes people are not necessarily where they're calling from. But hello, you're on the air.
It's Joy.
Hey, Bishop, it's Brandon.
Brandon, oh, okay.
Oh, Brandon, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We got Brandon in Tennessee.
How you doing?
Hey,
I'm doing good. How are you all?
Doing fantastic. I know we're in for a good one here because you give us some of the best content for the show now. So,
like I had posted on the social media a couple minutes ago, actually, it's like I got 24 years of like bad teachings to like fix. So I just like whenever you want questions, I got them.
Well, this is the show of questions, so anytime, just keep throwing them out there, and we'll use them. What have you got for us tonight?
Okay, so I was wanting to know if you could go a little more in depth with the theology of spiritual degradation.
Oh, okay, spiritual degradation. So, like, you're talking about the dying process on the spiritual side.
Yes.
Okay. All right, that's a good one. All right, yeah, I definitely can do that because it is something that I think is more of a metaphysical thing. It's not a religious, although it is, I guess it's somewhat religious because there are religions that recognize this, and certainly Judaism and paganism both did, which I find remarkable that they had this agreeable thing about the afterlife. And they didn't agree just about anywhere else in spirituality, but on the afterlife, Hades and Sheol were pretty much the same thing. I find that remarkable. And Shinto has a similar concept as well. And in my work, I have witnessed this as part of the process in what we do with trying to reconcile hauntings or people that might have attached. And one of the things I was interested in, and this is how it started to kind of get to the bottom of this, was how did why is there so much trauma? Okay, why does that not break away with the brain? Because you think that the brain would be really where the trauma is stored. It's an experience after all. So you think that if the brain is gone, because that dies with the body, you would think that the spirit would be free of a lot of those things. But that's not what happens, because there's an intimate symbiotic connection, spirit and body. They're not separate things, really. They're separate functions, but they're the same entity. And so when the body dies, the spirit really is in a state of immediate trauma, because half of itself is now no longer working. And it doesn't necessarily know how to work with that, because it was designed to be both a corporeal and non-corporeal being. And we are both corporeal and non-corporeal. Even a scientist cannot dispute that. Okay, you don't want to believe in the spirit? That's fine. But what the ancients called spirit is all the thoughts in your mind. And you don't doubt that thoughts exist, right? I mean,
consciousness exists.
Consciousness exists. This. I think, therefore I am, is a fundamental principle. And so, therefore, even if you're completely an atheist, completely a scientific type, you can't dispute that we're still got a incorporeal aspect to our nature. Now, the church takes this further, spiritual people take this further, or religious people take it further by saying that there's a larger component to that than just simply the world of the mind. And it doesn't necessarily perish immediately just because the mind is no longer working. In my experience, what I've witnessed, and the best way that I describe it, is that the brain seems to be an antenna, a receptor for receiving some kind of material that it then decodes and breaks down into what we consider to be consciousness. But the seat of consciousness is not the brain. I believe, in my experience, that consciousness is a fundamental principle of the universe itself, but it is more about fundamental properties of awareness than it is specific individual consciousness. So really, when people are asking, what is the nature of the afterlife, or, what happens to me when I die, what they're really asking you is there a continuity of consciousness? And what they mean by that is, do I, as I exist now, continue to exist when I die? And the answer to that is not necessarily. That is where salvation comes in, because part of what salvation does is keeps us cohesive. That's one of the metaphysical aspects of salvation, which is why the resurrection is so important. Incidentally, you might wonder, why so much emphasis on the resurrection? You don't hear Christians talk about the resurrection all that much. You don't. They're all about going to heaven. And grandma dies, grandma's automatically in heaven. And when I die, I'll say grandma. All right, but they don't talk about the resurrection.
It's always tricky at funerals, isn't it?
It
when
is.
people say that.
It is.
Especially when they say, she's an angel now in heaven.
An angel. Oh my God.
I know you mean well, but it's not true.
Wrong species.
Yeah, you can't. You just can't accept that. So, when you have a situation where, and I just want to say right now, I can get long-winded on these, but if you're on the line, don't hang up, okay? If you're dialing in, get your place in the queue and stay there. Just keep yourself connected. Mute it or whatever so you can watch the show. And then when I bring you on, make sure you can hear me in the phone so you know when I bring you on, because there is a delay between what you see on there and what you see, what you hear on the phone. But don't hang up. We're looking like there's some buffering here, so I'm going to just give it a minute to. Okay, it looks like it's fixed now. So Hades didn't go anywhere. Sheol didn't go anywhere. All right, Jesus coming did not change the fundamental properties of the cosmos. He didn't change creation. Okay, he's changing us, and through us, there will be a new creation eventually. Where that's what's being built right now. That's the kingdom of heaven that is in the process of coming. That the process of salvation that Father Chris was talking about. That process, part of that process is ushering in the kingdom. Okay, so we're getting there. We're not there right now. But creation wasn't fundamentally changed by Jesus coming. We are doing that together. Okay, that's part of this entire thing, which is why it ends with the new heaven and the new earth. But that's besides the point. So Sheol and Hades are still very much existent and are very much the natural result of the fallen world now. So a person that does nothing for their salvation, cultivates no grace, doesn't care, doesn't want to care, the natural state of them will be the degradation process that is natural. The same dying process that the human body undergoes when it ceases to function as a living organism, and then the dying process breaks down, rigor mortis sets in very quickly, and then eventually, there really isn't anything there except decomposition at this point. Okay, in the end, the bacteria wins, right? And the brain goes with that. So the everything that we know about individuality and consciousness, that dies. But the spirit is a little bit more ethereal. It doesn't follow the same pattern as the body, and it breaks down in a different way at a different rate, but it still decomposes. That's Sheol. That's Hades. That condition is what the ancients were looking at when they said that they're seeing the shades and they're barely conscious.
And that's the idea of Yomi in Shinto, is that? Yeah.
Yes, Yomi. Yes, thank you. Yeah. I couldn't remember the name, but I mentioned Shinto. Yes, Yomi. It's the same thing. It's this. It's like a sleep state, but it's deeper than that. There's no activity. It's not like you're not dreaming. It is basically just a lights out, barely even aware. If you've ever been heavily drugged,
that what you think is that what you think is meant by being anathematized? Yes. I mean, in the Orthodox Church, they talk about, I don't mean the anathemas on doctrines. I mean, the people for whom the presence of God is hell, not perfect light and truth.
Yes.
That essentially they just are obliterated.
Yes. I think that's exactly what it is. And that's why I am, and I maintain a theology, and I don't teach this necessarily as a doctrine of the faith. Okay, I usually qualify it by saying this is my interpretation of it, but I am an annihilationist in that respect because I don't see anything that exists within the process of death that would have anything eternal about it other than the fact that death is eternal. So to say that going to hell is an eternal punishment, it's accurate in the same way that we say that there's no salvation outside the church. It's just not a complete understanding. Yes, hell is eternal because when you die, if you truly go through that second death, the spiritual death, there's no coming back from that. There's no recovery from that. But it's implied that there's opportunity, a last chance perhaps, which is where I think people like Mother Angelica get this idea that when you die, God's not quite done with you yet. There's still opportunity there potentially. So what we see is that because of the disease, the pandemic. You want to talk about pandemic? The pandemic of our time is not COVID-19. The pandemic of our time is spiritual apathy. Most
faithlessness.
People, yes, faithlessness. People are not dying well, and so what we're seeing and why we're seeing such violent hauntings and such pervasive levels of this type of activity, and that even casual people are now recognizing that there's some kind of crazy shit going on in my home or something like that, where people that ordinarily would have never believed in this stuff are having experiences that are forcing them to believe in it. Why is this happening with such great number now? It's because the spiritual apathy has finally been realized in that dying process, and they are terrified to look into the abyss and realize that there's no coming back from that. So they don't know what to do. They don't know where to run. They continue to live out their afterlife the same way that they lived their life, in apathy and fear and ignorance. And that is what happens is if a spirit is allowed to stay in that state, it just slowly degrades right here. It still enters into that condition of Sheol.
This is where politics becomes real to me, because I'm a libertarian, as you know, but I am anti-leftist. I don't mean I'm anti people that disagree with me or have different views of economic structures.
Yes,
I'm anti-leftist because leftism is leaving people bereft of the option of faith.
Yeah,
because it essentially denies any God. Because it's a materialistic way of it. Sorry, This is my characterization of the.
No,
I'm telling you about the leftist I oppose.
I agree.
I mean, I see that too. I see it too. I mean, I think that there are definitely spiritual leftists, and I know that the Roman Catholic Church has a lot of liberals in it. It's probably the most liberal denomination.
People. I don't mean that at all. I don't mean people that want to vote Democrat or Labour, or I don't mean that. Right. I mean the leftist agenda, which is materialist and anti-faith.
We call that in this country. We tend to call that progressivism, even though it's not what progressivism started out as. No, indeed not.
But it's a good word for it in this day and age, even here.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm anti-progressives because they're removing that option. So, where people are approaching death, even my own family members, okay, and they know I'm a priest. They know that, I'm skilled and trained in these sorts of things. They are trapped in this cycle of saying, I can't reach out for that. And it's either because, I'm a hypocrite because I've not lived a Christian life, so I can't start now. Wrong. Wrong. You can start now.
It's never too late to start.
Constantine was baptized on his deathbed. Mm-hmm. So wrong. Do you know what? There's this lie that there's nothing worse than hypocrisy. Yes, there is. Most things are worse than hypocrisy. It's okay to be a hypocrite, realize it, and go mea culpa. Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah.
What people mean by hypocrisy isn't actually hypocrisy. What they mean is people that demand perfection of you and are very easy on themselves, right? And that's actually not hypocrisy.
Right.
That's just being a dick. So that's the theological term I hope people can understand. Yeah. So, and I think, so I'm very anti those progressives because they're stealing people of that opportunity. So either they feel like they're a hypocrite, which is who cares, do it anyway, or they think, no, that's no longer an option. It's been taken off the table by all of these wise people that have spoken. And of course,
I love it. I have friends of all political ideologies, but I do have several friends of mine on the way left who, when I tell them my experience, my near-death experience, and how it brought me back to my faith, and had I not had that seed planted of my faith years ago as a child, I don't think I'd be here.
Right.
It wouldn't have been an option.
I knew who to call on when my body, I could no longer feel my body, and I was in the black abyss. I was there.
You experienced. You were in Sheol. I mean, you saw it.
I experienced death.
Yes.
I was in Sheol, or what you call the Bordeaux.
Well, I mean, in Buddhism, it's referred to as the Bardo, but it's essentially the same thing. It's just Buddhism takes it a little bit further with what the Bardo is, and it kind of explains why it's so terrifying and why it's so difficult to navigate. And part of it is because you don't have logical reason anymore. There's no brain to help you. I
experienced it. Had I not had that seed already planted from childhood, I wasn't part of any real faith when this happened to me.
Right.
But I had that seed within me that knew to call out for the right thing, and I was saved from certain death.
Yes.
And I still have friends of mine who don't have any faith, are very anti-Christian, and then they dismiss my experience as if I'm telling them a story. It's not a story, damn it. I fucking lived it. So, and when I try to explain it to them, it's almost as if you're telling them a truth, but they're so angry that they just refuse.
Well, they're looking for excuses to maintain their worldview against their.
Why would I change my entire life?
Yeah.
Well, it's actually a neurosis because people like that tend to be neurotic, right?
It's something.
So. Because I think Fulton Sheen once said the difference between a psychotic and a neurotic is that, a psychotic, might think that he's a speedboat. A neurotic might think that he's a speedboat and he's mad about it.
That note, let's take our break at the top of the hour here. When we come back, we'll finish Brandon's question. We got another call here from the Tennessee area code 615. We'll take that one. Don't go away.
All right.
When I'm with you, I am able to keep pushing my limits, and all the drive that I have, well, I'm going the distance with you. I didn't know what I had till I knew what was missing, and everything that I dread, well, I built a resistance with you. Catch me when I fall, and I'll keep you on the ground. You're gone, I wish you'd stay. I could look at you for days. been broken too many times, but I'll be waiting to make you lose from all you've taken. But if we listen to each other, I made our mistakes, then I can show you who I am, because I'm not the same. I'm better with you. I'm better with you. I'm better with you. Catch me when I fall, and I'll keep you off the ground. That's when I am, that I need to spend my life here with you.
Welcome back, everyone, to the second part of Vestiges After Dark. As we begin the second segment here, we will continue to take your questions from the chat room and also from callers. We have one on the line right now. We'll be taking them on the air here in a moment, but we want to finish the question from Brandon. I'll do a short summary when we get back here. And the number to call if you have a question, comment, or even a story, we'd love to hear from you. That's 347-514-7150. That's 347-514-7150. Enter PIN number 3768923. And remember, you can call us free if you're international on Skype. Eye of the Seer. Just dial that up and we'll take you on. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, so when we left off at the break, we were kind of closing up Brandon's question about spiritual degradation. Now, that's a term that I have coined for the work that I do and the model that I work within for the Order of Exorcists and my role that I play in spiritual problem resolution, because most of spiritual problem resolution has nothing to do with exorcisms or demons. It has almost everything to do with helping to rest lost souls, if you want to call them that. And essentially what we're dealing with are people that are stuck in such a way, such a terror of looking into that abyss and really not knowing what to do. And so the light of the church helps them, because they exist, and this is where the Buddhism comes in, the Bardo. They exist in sort of a perpetual darkness. There's obviously spiritual beings present, and they can feel and sense those things, and they can be quite terrifying. But they are in darkness, and there are little lights that can get their attention, sort of, again, instinctually moving towards the lights, right? Remember Poltergeist? Don't go into the light, Carol Ann. Turns out that was right. Don't go into the light, because the lights are typically the wrong delusions. What you're really looking for is the true light, which is shadowed by all of the deceptive lights. And the church is the true light. It shines in a different way. It shines in a brighter way, and it can cut through for them the illusions that can get them trapped in Buddhism, they get trapped on the wheel of samsara, but in Christianity, we would just simply say they spiritually degrade and become nothing. And it's true. Now, the problem is, and this is the part that I was trying to get to before the break, we just ran out of time. The problem is, we're not just a body, a corporeal body. We're not just an incorporeal spirit. We're also of the essence of made in the image of God, which is the soul.
Right.
And souls and spirits are different things. They're not, we use them interchangeably today. You know, we say the soul went off to heaven, or I saw his soul leave his body. The thing is, and this is the caveat, do all souls go to heaven? Well, potentially. And let me explain what I mean by that. One of the things that bugs the hell out of me is when somebody contacts my office and says, I sold my soul to the devil. I need your help to get it back, if that's even possible, and I don't think it is. And I have to now go through this very detailed theological explanation to such a person by explaining to them that it is not possible for you to sell your soul, because you can't sell something that does not belong to you. The soul is not yours. The soul is that divinity that lives within. That is that room inside yourself, the interior castle, as St. Teresa of Avila would put it, your body being a temple of the Holy Spirit. Where does the Holy Spirit reside within you? That is the soul. That returns to God. Doesn't mean that you get to keep it, though. That's the difference, okay? This is where it gets a little metaphysical and a little less theological. But if you read the theology, you can read between the lines, and then the metaphysics makes sense. And so what we're looking at here is that what is salvation? People say, oh, it's going to be live with God. It's going to heaven. Yeah, it's those things. Those are not the important parts, though. They're important, but that's not really what salvation's metaphysically doing. That's the result of salvation, right? That's after the fact. What salvation is doing is it's keeping you body, spirit, and soul together. It keeps you as one entity. It keeps you permanent, all right? Because without salvation, you can't stay permanent. You just degrade. You get subject to entropy. That's death. Now, the Bible doesn't use the word entropy. The Bible used the word death, which is why the theology of Christianity is to conquer death. It's not about, oh, let's save people from hell. Let's rescue them from the fires of hell. No, because the ancients didn't have any concept of Dante's Inferno. Even Gehenna was more of an elusive concept, more of a metaphor for sort of the finality of whatever results at the end of this long sleep in Sheol. But it still was not this place of eternal punishment, the devils and the pitchforks and, the different rooms where, you're tortured according to your crimes and, your sins or whatever. That has all been embellished over the years. If you would have gone to an ancient Christian, first century Christian and tell them that, they would not know what the hell you're talking about. They would not understand this. But what they would have understood is that death was this pervasive reality that you could not escape from on your own merit, which is true. You can't. Okay? Death is conquered through salvation. Christ gives us the grace to do that. He did it first, and he made it possible for now. Now we have the power to conquer death with his grace, with that grace of the cross. That's what the whole process is. That prevents spiritual degradation, which is why spiritual apathy is such a problem, because the one thing that can prevent this terror from happening is the one thing that almost everybody is rejecting today, because it's just not cool to be a person of faith, particularly for men. This is why I have mostly women that follow me, and I'm a lot of women. They'll contact me. I mean, you don't know how many times over the years I have had women contact me, and the men in their lives want nothing to do with anything that they're contacting me about. If it's a case that the daughter's having a problem, or the child's having a problem, the husband does not want to be involved. Doesn't want to be involved in this stuff. I don't believe in that shit. All right. If there's a marital issue, the wife is more than willing to come to me and get help. Husband wants nothing to do with it.
It's almost always the female
usually
of the family,
usually
the matriarchal person that will come to us when there's an issue.
Yeah.
It's rarely, if ever, the men.
Rarely. And that's sad. But it just goes to show again how this mentality has now turned into what it is now. So spiritual degradation is a real thing. It's what we are seeing, and it is preventable even when it begins. It is the grace of God. I have watched it work. This is why I know that death is definitely not before death, your life is not your last chance. Your last breath is not your last chance. There are opportunities, but it's perilous from that point forward. Right now, you have all the time in the world to get it right, and it doesn't take a whole lot. Faith, once you cultivate it, it's actually kind of an easy thing to maintain. It actually is. Not that you're not a rough time, not that there's not going to be challenges and difficulties, not that you won't sometimes second guess yourself, not that you won't ever have a dark night of the soul. I can't promise that. But overall, once you have a relationship with God, it is easy to keep that going as long as you are putting something into it. It only becomes difficult when you've set unrealistic expectations about what you can achieve here as a corporeal being, trying to deal with an immortal God that pre-existed you and has always been and will always be. And that's something that you have to be made different. That's, again, part of the resurrection. This is why the resurrection changes us. It's not just about the same body being united with the same spirit, with the same soul. It's also about a new kind of body. It comes back differently after the resurrection. That's why Jesus could, he still had the nail marks. Thomas could put his finger through them, but he could also pass through walls. He could also look different than they were used to seeing. Sometimes he looked like something else. Some of the non-canonical texts record Jesus looking sometimes like a child in the resurrected self. It's very interesting. And so I hope that answers the question. Calling in now. I don't know what we lost Father Chris. I don't know what happened to Father Chris. Hopefully he'll be back. Oh, it looks like he just turned off the camera. Maybe he's just resetting something. I'm calling in now from the 615 area code, which is also a Tennessee number. Hello, you're on the air.
Someone to clean. Jamie said my name. I had to call.
Oh, yeah. When we get a Tennessee number, I don't ever remember which number you call from. I guess I should remember the other digits, but I'm just terrible with numbers. But anytime I see a Tennessee number, we're like, oh, it might be Joy.
Yep, that was Joy.
But now we got Brandon out there in Tennessee, so it could be either one of you.
Yeah,
now.
We got to watch out for that.
Got to watch out.
Right?
Yeah. So
well, 615 is Nashville specifically.
615. So that's where you used to be, and you just kept the number.
Yeah, that's where I started out, and I moved to Denver, and now I'm in Vegas. So, but I actually did have a question, and I had been thinking about calling up.
Yeah,
and asking.
Let's have it.
Because I know we were talking about demons and culpability over the weekend. And so that got my mind to thinking about stuff like that. Like I thought about like when I was having my worst times with spirit attachment, and it was mostly my own trauma spouting out from me.
Right.
So, my thoughts were never of like committing violence. They were mostly of just like withdrawing, and only horror we have is, murder here. So no, there's other ways that demonic thought can manifest. There's like 7 deadly sins. Right.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of different archetypes that people have and different ways that people think. And like, I've never thought of hurting people.
Right. Yeah.
But when we think of that, that's like the first thing we think of. And, here was this person trying to get away with something, with hurting someone, saying that a demon made them do it. And it's like, a demon would never make me do that.
Yeah. It's
because it would manifest different thoughts in my head.
It's a good question. I can't really go into too much detail on the air about the how we came to this, but I can say probably this much. I was contacted. My office was contacted this past week from a legal team that is working a case. It's a defense team that's working a case with an individual who has been apprehended, and law enforcement used the words demonically possessed because of the things that they saw. He was charged with multiple accounts of a particular crime, and they were asking if I could come in and evaluate and maybe be an expert witness for this case. And one of the things that it was a violent crime. I'm not going to go again into detail about this, but it was a violent crime.
Yeah, pretty big.
What Joy's mentioning here is important, and this is such a good one, such a good question. Joy, you asked some of the best questions. That's why I love when you call in. This is you hear me talk about how the devil has no power, and people like really kind of get shocked by that, because it's like, well, I mean, come on, he's like a fallen angel. I mean, he's got to have all this power, so much more powerful than we are. No. When you're fallen, you lose all your power. You have to become a parasite at that point in order to survive, and that's what he's done all this time. He can only use the power you give him, and the power that we give him is usually born of our own internal weaknesses. So there are people that have a proclivity to be violent. That's going to be one of the manipulations that the devil could use to utilize and feed off of that particular individual, the one that they want me to come in and testify.
Certainly more obvious.
Yes. For you don't have violent tendency. So there's nothing for the devil to draw from there. So he's not going to pull from that with you. So he's going to use something else, which is, other weaknesses that you possess that would manifest. And that would be, of course, coming back with some of the trauma. And you've talked about it on this show, so it's not a complete secret to this audience.
Oh, yeah.
The trauma that you suffered. And that was the weakness that he used for you, which again comes back into a lot of self-loathing sometimes, a lot of, feelings of inadequacy and depression. That becomes the weakness that he uses for feeding off of you, not one to hurt other people.
All of us have something.
All of us have something. We all have weakness. I mean, whatever we sin the most of is going to be our primary weakness. That's the one that if we were to ever obtain a demonic attachment, that's going to be the one that the devil uses against us, which is why it's very important for an exorcist to plug up as many of his weaknesses as he can, because they will use that during exorcisms against you. And you can't have that. You can't have a situation where, like, let's use an example of of course, we know that there's been from the 1950s on large, numbers of not large numbers, but numbers of individuals, priests that, molested children. I mean, that's no secret. It's big news. But let's say you had a priest that was actively doing this and was also an exorcist. It's not going to be very favorable to that case if he's going into an exorcism and the devil knows all about this and is using that to wear down your own, the exorcist's confidence, because ultimately, the real thing that gets people upset, but it's just true, is that it doesn't matter if he's a child molester, he still could be a successful exorcist because it's the grace of God that's working. It's not him. It has really nothing to do with him. But you can't be a flawed instrument. You have to, you can't be that flawed. You have to go into an exorcism with some, protections in place spiritually for yourself, which means that you need to be somewhat devout, I think. You don't have to be perfect. God, there'd be no exorcist if you had to be perfect, but you have to be at least sincere and devout enough that that
humility.
He can't use those sins again. He can't use your common sins against you. So so I think that I hope that answers your question, because that's why you wouldn't have these tendencies. You never felt like they were going to ever make you violent, right. And I never felt that from you, because I worked with you. We did your first visit where we did not an exorcism, but basically a blessing where we had to move some things around spiritually for you. So it was kind of like a pre-exorcism. And then we did the exorcism of the object that had the attachment that was sort of the source of the problem. And at both times, at no point did I ever feel, even though you were reacting, you had reactions, at no point did I ever feel like, let's get the restraints out, let's get ready to tackle her, she's going to jump us. Never. You always had, it always felt like the turmoil that was happening was always, you were eating yourself up inside, but it wasn't coming out in any way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's two different variations of the same thing. You're not weak in that category. You're not weak in the sense that you would hurt people or murder people. You wouldn't be that kind of person. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a good question though, because that explains why the devil doesn't have any power, because it's, again, he can only use what you give him. So don't give him anything to work with.
Right. Right. They start off with the smaller thoughts and then lead to bigger thoughts if you give in. And if you have no reason to give in to those kinds of thoughts, then, it's ineffective.
Yeah, exactly.
And for me, I know I struggle a lot with, my own capabilities, but I know I just got to keep one foot in front of the other, and at some point something will make sense and it'll all come together.
Well, that's all any of us can do.
You also have to understand, I'm sorry, Jamie, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You also have to understand, Joy, I think that, when you remove an attachment from someone, it basically leaves a raw infection. Okay. It's not like you can just like pull that tumor out and just be, okay, you're good to go. I mean, no, you gotta be healed back up. Okay. There's scar tissue, there's damage there. And the damage you're going to experience, the healing you're going to experience is going to be in the same way in which you were attached. So if you were attached in a way where this thing was eating you up inside, eating at your self-esteem, eating at your self-worth, and then, now it's removed, but now you still have that damage to that part of you, and you're still going to deal with. That's the hardest part. It's not the exorcisms. It's not the removing the attachment.
Right.
It's the years of recovery from this thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing, especially with me, because the attachment, I mean, I didn't get it from any of the investigations I went on. I didn't get it from, going to haunted locations. It was somebody that I knew.
Yeah.
And somebody that I was very closely related to, and that person attached to me. And I couldn't have fought that off on my own, because that's why it's so important to handle grief properly when it comes to parents and children, because they share your DNA.
Mm-hmm.
They share your energy. You're half of them.
Yes.
And so he had attached to me for years, and it was because I was trying to heal up things in my mind. I was actively trying to heal myself, and he had been suppressing those things for so long that when I came to you and had him removed, all of that stuff started coming out like pus, like an infection, just exploding out of me. And that was my demon factory stage. And the way to get through that is therapy. And I had a whole lot of it. I had 2 therapists, and I was talking to you, trying to align myself spiritually, and through all of it, there were so many people getting so many wrong ideas about me. Yeah. And I started feeling more like I was a spectacle than helping anybody. And the whole reason I was telling people was to help people. And I just didn't feel like I was doing that. So, I kind of lost my confidence and faltered out.
Well, I mean,
so
and
I'm just kind of rethinking myself right now.
And I think that's what you should be doing. I mean, I think there's still a need for some convalescence. I think you need to, again, because spiritual matters do not work at the same rate as corporeal matters. The kind of healing that you would be experiencing from a physical injury or physical, disease that was like removing a tumor, for example, is not going to parallel in the spiritual. Time doesn't work the same way. So, there are people where you could remove an attachment and they recover very quickly, to the point that it's almost instantaneous, and you're like, wow, that's shocking. And people will sometimes say, oh my God, that's a miracle. No, it's not a miracle. It's just that metaphysically, time does not work the same way. And so whatever it was that we did metaphysically entered in at exactly the right moment from our side of the equation, so that the end result was more instantaneous. But for most people, it's not going to work that quickly, and it can take years to recover from that kind of attachment. It's not something that happened. This is the side that I wish we could show on shows like Ghost Adventures and the documentaries I'm on. And we're trying with the documentary I've been shooting, or Jamie and I have been shooting for the last couple of years, which was slowed down greatly because of COVID. But that we're trying to make this a more complete picture, because what people see is only the instantaneous stuff, and it's not instantaneous, as you know so well.
Yeah. Like when I first went, I thought it was over, and I had no idea like what was even attached to me.
Yeah.
So like it was over time, this realization started coming about, and then all this other stuff started happening, and it didn't make sense until after a while we had to get away from it enough to analyze it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it takes time to even understand what's happening well enough to do anything about it. And
right. Nobody's going to be different.
I can talk about the few cases.
Yeah.
Right. Like with the cases that I've worked, generally they've been very quick to resolve, because it's not really anything to big or scary, and the people aren't really frightened or anything. They just really wanted to understand what was happening.
Right.
And then take it from there, you know?
Right.
So, you know, when we did have something where we needed some kind of resolution, I could advise them on how to construct their own resolution and walk them through it. And that's usually what I did, because each person handled things differently.
Yeah.
But,
Exactly.
you know, like I haven't really had a whole lot of experience with that. I wish I had more, but I would have to be like right now, I just have me, and I would need more people, I think, if I was going to be able to help others.
You do. I would say
right now,
minimum
I'm
a
not
team
in a
of 3
place
or
to
4.
do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Like
think
right now, I'm not in a place to do that. So like I'm holding off on all of it. You know, there's the one case that I've got, and, you know, they're not too, you know, worked up or anything. So we've been in contact roughly. I think both of us were having issues all summer long, and we're going to connect at some point
yeah.
soonish. I think that was the plan anyway.
Right.
But it's, you know, kind of loose plans and see where it goes from there. But, you know, something like that is easily handled just by myself. But for a case like what you would give me, I would need a team of like at least 3, I think.
Well, yeah, you do, because our protocols.
Like I'm not in a place to get people right now.
Our protocols in the Order of Exorcists, this would be an extension of that work. I mean, you wouldn't, once we start the demonology program, which we're still a long ways off from, but once we start the demonology program.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we're going to be following under, they're not going to be members of the Order of Exorcists, but they will be, you know, affiliates through us. And the thing to keep in mind about that is that the protocols require 3 people minimum. And that's just for safety reasons.
Okay.
That's just so that we know that when you go in, you always have a witness, because people can do crazy shit. You kind of
Exactly.
we kind of require that everything is recorded. Everything needs to be on camera.
Yeah.
That way, if somebody says you did something, you can prove that you didn't. So we don't ever take cases where there's not a recorder going, and you kind of need somebody that runs that. So, so you need at least 3. And I don't let anybody go on cases by themselves. Jamie, much to Jamie's dismay, I know that she's like, can I go out there? I've talked to her on the phone. I think she's okay. I think I'll be okay.
Can I?
It's a terrible idea.
Yeah, and see, even.
Oh yeah, I know.
It would be.
Yeah, and see, even
but us,
even at my
ourselves.
Yeah, and see, even at my most excited about investigating and stuff, I would never go by myself.
Right.
Like I would go in a group. If it was like a investigation group that I could tag along with, I would go with them. But like the only time I went by myself was in a car in a park, and other people were nearby.
Yeah, right.
They weren't involved in the investigation, but I knew if I needed help, I could just call out to them.
Yeah.
Or they would notice if something was going wrong or something.
Right.
Yeah. So, like, I would never dream of going by myself to a haunted location and trying to investigate.
No, it's not a smart thing to do. I mean, you really kind of need. I mean, you need really 3. You really need 3. I wouldn't even do it with 2. Even when we do ghost adventures, like we do
down, you need to have the backup, so to speak.
When Jamie and I do a show, the people are looking and saying it's just the 2 of us there, so we look like we're this team. But it's like we always have 2 or 3 cameramen, a sound guy, a production manager. There's always a lot of people there. So if the shit really hit the fan, there'd always be other people that could get involved. So even on TV, yeah. So, but when we're not shooting a show, when we're doing the work for the ministry, that's not televised, it's always at least 3 of us, sometimes more. I mean, like there's a case that we were thinking about doing. It's an out-of-state one. And the person has violent tendencies, has shown violent tendencies. And I said, we're going to need 4 for this one. We're going to need to take 4. So that needs to be factored into the budget for this particular case. If we take it, it's going to be more expensive than
but also it's not just about safety. It's actually about, when a priest goes to do an exorcism, he represents the whole church.
Absolutely.
And so, the church should be with you, like, if possible.
Yeah.
It's not always possible. Look, needs must when the devil drives is an apt saying for this. But actually, it's not just about physical safety or accountability or allegations that could be made, and those are all very good reasons not to do things on your own. But it's more than that. It's that the exorcist does not have his own power. He has the power of Christ, and Christ's power is made manifest through his church, and therefore the church should be there to pray, if at all possible. Like, we all know in an ideal world it would be in a church, on sacred ground, in a church, with the church present, praying. They're the perfect, ideal circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we're doing an exorcism, if we have the people, they're reciting the rosary in the background while we're doing the exorcism,
praying for that person now.
Yes,
and praying for the intercession of the Holy Spirit. So they're the idea. Now, we don't always have the ideal circumstances, but if at all possible, we should have the church, at least representatives of the church with us. That's actually where Protestant exorcists get it right. They have this very much a sense that at least as they see them, elders of their church should be there and present and praying. Yeah. And I think sometimes Catholics can fall into the trap of, well, if the priest's there, then we've got it all.
That's part of what we want to do also with the demonology program, is also to be able to take people on as individual affiliates and connect them in major cities with other affiliates that are there, so that they don't have to go and find people, that they would be able to just be connected through the same ministry program, assuming we're getting enough people to fill those slots for those locations. And one of the models that I've already...
one can hope.
I think that would be a good way. That way everyone's trained, and you're not, and no one's responsible for that. You're all kind of coming into it together as being trained directly from the ministry. So everyone's on the same page, and then you're all connected together. So what we probably would do is like have major city groups and then recruit for those locations, one at a time, and then bring those individuals on, train them and connect them, where it would be a seamless process. And then really at that point, the only work that would need to be done by that group would be actually going to the cases and seeing what can be done. Yeah. That's what we would plan to do. But
see, the way I feel about it is, if I'm supposed to be involved in that stuff, I will be. And my team will form around me.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to look at it.
I won't have to struggle with it.
Right.
That's the way I see it. My team will happen. And when I get that opportunity, that's when I'll be concerned about it. Right now, I'm doing something else. I'm doing one foot in front of the other and seeing where it takes me.
Yeah. And I think that's the smartest way that you can handle it. But Joy, thank you so much for your question and calling in. And what a great question. I mean, that was a great way to segue into my explanation for why I tell people the devil has no power of his own. And that was a good way of explaining it. Thank you for that.
Exactly. Exactly. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You have a wonderful night.
You too. Bye.
Thank you. A good point. She brought up a couple points there, but the main one being, why did she feel, or did she experience attachment, but didn't feel violent tendencies like so many of these other individuals do? And it's just like, goes to the weakness, because the weakness is where it attaches to. It attaches to your weakest point, not your strong ones. I think everybody has violent tendencies, but not everyone has immoral violent tendencies. I think human beings are sort of naturally violent, but there's a difference between a sociopath that gets off on hurting people and a person who, when their back's against the wall and being threatened, or their family's being threatened, that they become violent. There's two completely different types of people there.
There's also the confusion between sin and inactivity.
Yes.
Some people aren't violently sinful just because they don't have it in them.
That's
Like,
true.
They haven't got the capacity to do it. It's not that they wouldn't do it. It's that they just, I'm always kind of concerned about that. Is that, some people confuse passivity with being virtuous.
Particularly when you're a Christian. When you're a Christian, they want you to be. They want you to. They demand you turn the other cheek. That used to be one of the thing. I mean, I should tell everybody. Kind of
you don't understand what that means, do you?
Big announcement.
Yes, absolutely.
They don't know. Big announcement. Okay. I thought I'd have a little bit of fun with Twitter. Now, I meant what I said. I said I love when Twitter permanently banned my account. I was overjoyed because I had been struggling for months with deleting it, but people would always kind of make me feel like I shouldn't, because there was, people would say, I was able to connect with you. You brought me back to the church. People that I didn't even know, I reached, that I had reached on some kind of level, and it was all because of Twitter. So it's like, well, maybe I shouldn't be deleting this, because it seems like it's actually helping people, despite the fact that it's making my life a living hell. So, I'm kind of that kind of sacrificial person. I'll do something that's absolutely miserable if it's helping enough people. And Twitter was definitely that for me. But when Twitter permanently banned my account, I was kind of like, oh, thank you for doing the dirty work for me. Now I don't have to struggle with this anymore. I can just be done with it. And if people want to find me, they can find me other ways. But when Elon Musk, bought Twitter finally, and had all these big words about, we're going to make it great. It's going to be this wonderful place again. Not that it ever was a wonderful place. But when he bought it, I thought, well, let's have a little bit of fun. Let's appeal and try to see if I can get my account back. Not that I would probably use it. I think I talked to my office staff, and we kind of agreed that somebody would take it over and just make announcements, or for this show or stuff like that. I wouldn't be on there anymore myself. But it didn't come back, and I didn't hear anything. And then Donald Trump gets his account reinstated. And I thought, well, if Donald Trump got his account reinstated, certainly there's nothing I could have done that would even, in comparison to the many things that someone could argue with Donald Trump, not wanting him on social media. Certainly there's nothing that I could have done that was that bad. I'm a sarcastic person, particularly when you come at me with bullshit. I'll get very sarcastic. I'll get very cleverly sarcastic with you. And I guess if you're an idiot, you might interpret words like that to sound like violence or whatever. But I tried again. I appealed again. And this time I got an email that said, this looks like it's connected to case file blah, 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 whatever it was. So we're going to reattach this to this case. And so I'm like, so there's an open case on my account. Well, let me go and dig through. And I found an email from Twitter in my junk folder. And it was just buried in there because there's just so many things that come in. And I just, it's so easy to miss. And I read it, and they had the explanation for why they would not reinstate my account. And it's because they said I incite violence. And I'm like, when did and so I wrote back to them. I said, I haven't heard back from this one yet, but I wrote back and I said, show me the offending tweet. I want to see what I did that was inciting violence. I want to see this, because Donald Trump, I mean, there's half this country and perhaps 3/4 of this world that thinks that he incited violence and used Twitter to do it.
By the way.
Well, I mean, I guess that could be disputed. Okay. I guess that could be disputed.
It's a very high bar. It's a very, necessarily so, a very high legal bar to say someone's incited violence.
I would think so.
Do it.
I would think so, but let's just say the bar here is just Twitter's terms of service, which is not going to be at the same standard, nor is it's also going to be more arbitrary too, because you're just having unskilled people deciding this stuff. It's not going to a jury. You're just being judged outside of your control.
Yeah, there's no trial,
no high standard.
Even the appeal process is not really an appeal process. There's no way that you can plead You can't go and say, I want to go to a hearing so I can explain what's happening here and show me what I did. But this is just, Twitter just operates as judge, jury, and executioner.
There's no due process.
And there's no due process. There's nothing you can do to defend it. You just have to go with whatever they tell you. And they're still not telling me what exactly I did. But this is what's shocking to me, because whether you believe Donald Trump incited violence, according to the standards of Twitter's terms of service, is up to you to decide for yourself, I guess. But half the country thinks he did. And yet Twitter will not reinstate my account, but has reinstated his. And I can't think of one thing I might have done that would have been anything close or closely related to inciting violence. I will sometimes be very colorful in my sarcasm. I will, if somebody says something to me, I'm not above saying, go fuck yourself. And let me show you how. That is not violence. It's just my way of just being colorful in the postmodern era. It's like, okay, well, you want to be postmodern with me? I'm going to get postmodern with your ass back. That's not violence. But that was my Twitter account. And all of you, almost everyone that knows about me had connected on some level or saw me on Twitter at some point, almost everybody. And I don't think I met the standard of even what people believe about Donald Trump. I'm not talking about whether he did or not. I'm just saying, just take what people believe about him. Right. I did not do anything that would even fall into that, even close to that category, and yet I can't get my account back. Not that I want.
I guess though there's also a public interest argument, because the reason that Donald Trump has got his account back is because he's famous and because he's a presidential candidate. Blah blah blah. In other words, there's going to be there was definitely a direct involvement from the owner of the company in his case. Those arguments aren't going to apply to me or you.
That's true, but that just also shows how arbitrary it is, though.
Of course it is. Yeah. And it is. I mean, people need to, for good or ill, understand just how arbitrary it is.
Yeah.
Elon Musk owns Twitter. He can decide who's on it and who's not.
Yeah. Well, look at what he did with that comedian there.
I actually don't mind that, but for me, that's far more honest than what happened beforehand. Because what happened beforehand was this pretense of a kind of a system of deciding, and and we all know it was just used to close down people on the
certain accounts. Yeah.
So,
that's the only thing I can think of that I might have said, because I can still see my Twitter account. Like if I go, let me see if I can even bring it up. I can still go to my account. It's still there, and I can still read my tweets. So I can go back and read everything that I tweeted. I just can't interact anymore, but I can read. And the last thing I wrote. Now let's see if this incites violence. Let's find out. Okay. A person came on Twitter by the name of Dakota, and this was on October 13th, 2021. And he or she, I'm assuming it's a she because it looks like it's a female picture, but it doesn't look quite like it's a real picture. I don't know. They said, I know you are busy with a lot of things and it may sound selfish. Would you please say a small prayer for my stepbrother's family, friends, etc.? He died from COVID yesterday. I still don't understand why people don't get vaccinated. Okay. That was the tweet to me. It wasn't really a question. It was just a tweet at me to pray. So I responded back. I retweeted this because that's how I used to handle Twitter. If somebody sent me something that I was going to respond to, I always retweeted them. Okay. And so I responded, all my prayers. There are many reasons why people don't get vaccinated. Some medically can't. Some religiously object to how they were derived. Some don't like politicians and celebrities telling them to take a pharmaceutical instead of their doctor. Some don't like coercion, etc. And then Dakota came back and said, thank you so very much for your prayers and words. I get frustrated by people not vaccinated because every death breaks my heart a little farther. Thank you. And I said, don't be frustrated at people. I retweeted her again. Don't be frustrated at people for exercising their right to make a personal medical decision. Be frustrated at the politicians and corporations for taking medical care out of the hands of our primary physicians. If people don't trust these vaccines, this is primarily why. Now, that was the last thing I said before I got banned. Okay. Prior to that, it was an episode of Vestiges After Dark with Joy Keeling, Spirit Attachment. It was her Spirit Attachment episode. The tweet before that was a picture of salmon with cream chive reduction in a white Bordeaux sauce.
That's what it was.
Yeah, that was it. That was it. The salmon.
The chives for you, mister.
And then
It was the chives.
It was the chives. And then prior to that was this exchange with Foolish Mortal. Remember him? About Bond. Yeah. And we were talking about the new James Bond movie, and not everyone had seen it, so I had to bite my tongue. I guess now I can talk about it. For the record, it was a fantastic movie. It was a shitty Bond movie, but it was a fantastic movie, just a real shitty Bond movie.
Yeah, that's true.
Agreed.
Yep.
Agreed.
Bond does not die, okay?
No.
You do not kill Bond. All right, that breaks the formula for me, and completely unacceptable. Great spy film, but it wasn't a Bond movie. So when I watched the Daniel Craig's, I don't watch that one.
By the way, your COVID tweet has aged pretty well.
I think it has. Yeah. But that's, I mean, if that's violence, I mean, that's news to me. Because
you question the narrative.
I mean,
also people say inciting violence when in fact, inciting violence is telling somebody to commit an act of violence. Saying something like, if you come in my house, you know, if you break into my property, I'll probably shoot you.
I'll shoot you. Yeah, that's not inciting violence, right?
That's a statement of fact. But it's not incitement by any means, right. You know, and it's not even a specific
around and find out formula.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's actually not a threat of violence.
Nope.
Unless they're talking about something like that, where I might have said something like that, because I mean, I was colorful on Twitter. I know I was, and I know I did that intentionally. It was part of just the way that I handled being on there, because I hated it so much. So it's like I always said, like, if I'm going to use this thing, if I'm gonna make this part of my online identity, or part of connecting with fans of the shows that I'm on and all this stuff, then I'm just going to have some fun with it.
Satire was also banned on Twitter, so because don't forget the Babylon Bee got kicked off. You know, libs of TikTok were kicked off for just showing what libs are doing on TikTok.
Yeah.
Right. So so there was, but it actually goes back to something we were talking about, which is there is no sense of humor when it comes to leftists. The world's so serious. Everything's so serious.
Yeah.
You can't actually be fully alive, because I mean, I love the sort of I love to talk about the divine humor. You know, that it is godly. Like, humor is godly, and even in a political sense, you know, the court jester was vitally important.
Yeah.
In a certain period of life, when you have an absolute ruler, you have to have the court jester, because the court jester is the one that holds the mirror up to the autocrat. And if the autocrat kills the jester because he can't laugh at it, you've got a tyrant. You know, so the court jester is like the canary in the mine.
Yeah.
You know, if the jester is killed by the autocrat, by the king, the emperor, maybe, that's when you've got a tyrant. Being a king or an emperor is not being a tyrant. Right. You know, it's a system of governance. You know, some prefer, some don't. There's benefits to it, there's drawbacks to it. But the tyrant is the one that cannot have the court jester. You know, there was no court jester for Stalin. You know, he could not laugh at himself. Mm-hmm. And so, and really, it reveals beast, really. You know, if you can't laugh at yourself, you're in big trouble. Now, this happens on a low level with all of us, right? If we end up in a situation, times and seasons in our lives, where we can't laugh at ourselves, we know we've got some work to do. You know, but like, if that's an issue, then whatever the other issues are, you've got an issue to deal with yourself, within yourself. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, and that's why, the court jester gets shot. So libs of TikTok, the Babylon Bee, they got shot, you know, right? Because Twitter was a tyrant, and it was a tyrant for a particular cause. And
honestly, it still kind of is operating that way, as far as I'm concerned, because it's not looking into why, you know, whether or not this was a justified it's just saying, oh, you were banned for inciting violence. This is why we can't reactivate your account. But I don't think they're going to check to see what exactly was it about. What was the tweet? What was the offending action? They're just looking into the file and saying, oh, you were banned for violence. We don't reinstate those accounts, even under Elon Musk, because he said he wouldn't do it. Which again, I said I find funny that Trump was reinstated. I wasn't, even outside of the political, outside of the political identity.
It seems to be the way that other people get.
I can't.
No.
I mean,
other people can on your behalf.
Well, they could, but I mean, I don't know if that would have any impact. We could try. Tracy, my wife, is in the chat room, and she said if she remembers correctly, the last interaction I had on Twitter was someone else telling me, "Fuck around and find out, Padre." She's actually correct about that. That was one of the last things that actually happened. So
that's not inciting anything.
I know. I, for years, endured constant harassment on that platform. I was constantly attacked all the time, and nothing was ever done about any of those people. Never. They even went after my son once, and they did nothing. Twitter did nothing about it. One time they did. One time. But it happened multiple times, and sometimes they didn't do anything about it. So it's kind of infuriating, and it makes me think that Musk is, just fooling around now. He's having fun. He's not really taking it seriously. We're going to take our next break here and come back and take more of your questions from the chat room and from callers. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone, to the third and final part of Vestiges After Dark. We are just taking your questions, comments, stories, calling into the show, in the chat room. Whatever's on your mind. We're talking about it right now, just basically open, having fun. I love these shows. They're just relaxing. I want to also give a shout out to all our fantastic moderators and volunteers for this ministry. I don't often say it enough, mostly because I'm so busy I forget. But I never really actually forget the contributions all of you make with your time, being here for all these events. Some of you for every single one, being in that chat room, moderating. Thank you so much for all that you do, and supporting this ministry and supporting its outreach and all the things that it does. It means the world to us, and we could not do what we do without you. So make sure that you are nice to them. Those of you in the audience, be nice to our moderators. Okay, they're wonderful people, and they keep this church operational. We'll be right back with more after this. All right. I guess it's time to look at the chat room now. There's nobody in the queue, so let's go ahead and just dive right in. What have been the questions tonight, Father?
Well, one's very easy for me to answer quite quickly. One was a question about which pop vinyl on the shelf behind me.
Funko Pops.
So this is Steve Irwin and Suey.
Oh, okay.
You know, the Crocodile Hunter.
Crocodile Hunter. Okay, yeah.
And so this one is mine. That one's Jen's, but this one's mine. And I got this just after I'd been to see you.
Oh, really?
And we went to Vegas, and I went to the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop. You know, where Pawn Stars is filmed.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And opposite there's the toy. He gets him in as a toy expert, but it's literally on the street. So I got this from there, and it is Chief Brody from Jaws with his chum bucket. I think it's
God!
And a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. I love it.
That's outstanding.
We have
I just had to get it.
We have a bunch of those too, but they're all Sonic the Hedgehog.
Mine are all Star Wars.
Well, my stepdaughters have a lot of them, and they're mainly music stars like Morrissey and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, one of them likes all the Manchester bands, so it's easy for me to deal with. I went to school with them, and so all their Star Wars ones. Okay.
Your sound's gone a little bit strange here, Father. We're having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. Are you using a different mic?
No. Oh, hang on. No, I know why.
Is it not plugged in?
It's because I had to unplug it before.
Oh, okay.
And, I had some dramas, but hang on. This will improve things no end. So.
Oh my gosh, that's like night and day. Better? Yeah, much better.
I apologize.
No, that's okay.
My voice is my selling point, so I shouldn't shortchange myself.
No, you sound wonderful now.
So they're the pop vinyls that are on there. To answer the questions, and so the two stepdaughters, the older one has the music pop vinyls, the younger one has Marvel and Star Wars and all of those things.
Good
I
girl.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
easy one to answer.
I'm strictly Chief Brody. He's my only pot final.
That's a good one to have. I didn't even know such a thing existed.
No, neither did I. I was just kind of looking around the shop.
They've got one for everybody.
And I was like, look at him. So, yeah. And it is a brilliant movie. And I love Robert Shaw in it. He's absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Farewell and adieu, all you sweet Spanish ladies.
Oh,
he
yeah.
was singing that folk song. So
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I love folk songs. I'm obsessed with them.
It's a good character.
And then we've had a lot of talk about food and cooking. One of them was the age-old debate, because, of course, you guys call scones biscuits and biscuits cookies. So we're divided by a common language, as always. And the talk was about Tim Tams. So have you had Tim Tams? You guys?
No, I'm not familiar with it. I don't think.
It's like a chocolate-covered biscuit, but it's Australian, and it is actually really good. Like, we have penguin bars in England, which is kind of similar, but not as good. So
no, I don't think I know
kids
that
England,
one.
I've said the Tim Tams. That's the.
I would definitely try one.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
sounds
next time
good.
I come, I will bring a stack of them.
Okay.
I would definitely eat those.
Okay, that sounds good. That sounds good. So you said we have food questions?
Food questions. So some people also said, look, bring on questions about food, because between me and Bishop Bryan,
we can all cover that.
We can cover it, yeah.
Good cooks. So what was saying that they accidentally burnt their chicken. I was giving tips on that. If you're cooking meat, chicken was always traditionally covered in flour to help it stop sticking. It's particularly in ceramic pans, Dutch ovens, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's one way. With any meat, though, if it's a whole piece of meat, when you put it in a skillet, like steaks, for example, have it red hot, and when you put it in, just give it a little shake like that, and then leave it alone. If it's a beef steak, leave it. You put it in, one little shake, it stops it, that initial
break it loose,
sticking to the thing, and then leave it alone. Otherwise, you'll never get a decent caramelization. And what you end up doing is overcooking your steak to try and get the crust on the outside.
Yeah.
Leave it for 2 minutes, flip it, wiggle, leave it for 2 minutes, and then if it's really thick steak, then you need to throw extra butter in the pan. Don't use anything other than butter and olive oil.
Don't forget the
then
sides.
you spoon it over the top for 30 seconds each side.
Yeah.
And you basically baste it in hot butter, and then leave it to rest. Crucial thing, under foil, leave it to rest for at least 2 minutes, but normally more like 5. And then you'll get it perfect rare steak on a thick steak. But it won't be raw in the middle. A raw steak is not a rare steak.
Yeah.
A raw steak is you've not cooked it properly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, cooking tips with Father Chris. There you go.
I specialize in Indian cooking. If you want to know anything about Indian food, then ask away.
Oh yes, Indian. I've been doing that every lunch now. I've joined this service called the Cumin Club, and it basically I think it originated in India, because when you go into the website to make your selections, you have to choose which country you're in, India or the United States. I don't think they ship anywhere else, but they use this special freeze-dried technology that basically all you do is reconstitute it for a few minutes with hot water. And I was skeptical. I thought, how good can this be? And so I thought, well, I'll buy a pack, I'll buy a box and let's try it. I'm sure it's at least edible. And if I don't like it, I won't buy it again. I was blown away. It is right up there in quality with my favorite restaurant in town. And we have a really good, it's actually not, it's an Indian restaurant, but it's actually Bangladeshi.
Most are, by the way.
Yes.
Most are Bangladeshi.
And you can usually tell by the way they greet you when you come in. I find that when I go to, if it's a Bangladeshi restaurant, they're a lot friendlier here in the United States. And if you go to a Indian-owned restaurant, they're not exactly unfriendly. They just are much quieter. Bangladeshis will smile at you, sit down, and so that's how I kind of been able to detect the difference.
Very social.
So when they're
the main thing with Indian spices, I'm not surprised that that's good, by the way, because I think if it is like if it's put in stasis in a sense when it's, because the crucial thing with spices is it's obviously better to use whole spices, right? So you toast them and then you grind them and you use them. Yeah. And I make a lamb madras. This Indian chef. Most of my recipes are actually Bangladeshi or Pakistani, but this one is an Indian recipe and it is excellent. But the difference, so I thought I made it the second time. I thought I'll just make a load of this spice mix because it's an effort, right? Yeah. And the next time it was okay, but it was not as good because if you leave the spices, you can try and bring them back to life. I mean, we all have to have packets of spices in the cupboard. If you're going to use them and they've been open for a while, at least toast it first, to
reawaken them. Yeah.
But you won't beat making it from the whole spices.
Well, we're lucky.
What they do in restaurants.
We're lucky. We have here nearby an Indian market, and they have these packages, these giant packages of spices that are really quite cheap. I mean, when you go to the store and you buy these little tiny things, it's like $7 for this little vial. You go there, $7 gets you this giant crate of spice. And the flavors no comparison. So when I make Indian food, and I do Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi dishes, I will always go there and stock up on those good spices and make sure that
you really need the bones in the meat. Whether you're making chicken or lamb, you need to have the bones in.
You do. Buttered chicken.
The sauce.
Buttered chicken's my son's favorite. But it's traditionally made.
That's Australia's favorite curry.
I believe it. Yeah. Well, it is so good. But I mean, it's traditionally made with basically the leftover tandoori chicken. That's what actually goes into it. And so when he wants buttered chicken, if he wants me to make it at home, now we typically go to that Bangladeshi restaurant because they're just so good there. But when we used to make it more often, we made Indian all the time. What we would do is I would make tandoori chicken first, and I don't have an Indian. I forget what they're called. It's a clay oven that they cook tandoor. Well, it's a tandoori. It's a tandoor. That's what it is. Yeah. Tandoori chicken tandoor. Yeah. The tandoor clay oven. They put the chicken in there. Same way that they make the naan. And it's sort of like barbecued in that way, and it has that
instant caramelized. It's just delicious.
It's delicious, fantastic. And of course, tandoori chicken is marinated in yogurt, so it breaks down. It's never tough. It breaks down. It's very delicious. But I always make like 3 or 4 times more than what we eat, so that I can collect that meat and then break it down, and then the next day we make the butter chicken with it.
Delicious.
It is delicious.
And that's the other thing, you either have to do that with the meat or you have to marinate it.
Yes.
So because often the people will just put lamb or whatever, your chicken, whatever you're putting in there, just as it is, and then put the spices in to make the curry. You need to at least, you either do it in yogurt, like you said, for tandoori style chicken, or even if all you did was get some curry powder and put 2 tablespoons of that over the meat, and then put some lemon juice on it, mix it all up, put it in the fridge for at least an hour. Even that would revolutionize your curry.
Definitely.
Without getting into making your own spice mix, which makes it even better. But
garam masala.
Indian food now.
There's
I'm hungry now.
every Indian chef's got their own concoction of garam masala. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then also they tend to add right at the end another at least some turmeric and some other spices at the end. So you kind of got that the deep spice of the marinated meat. Then you got the spices you put in the curry, and then just before you serve it, you put in another dose of flavor in, and that's why when it's really well made, your mouth just goes, "Wow, what is this?"
Well, that's what, again, I like about
the secret ingredient at the end of a curry is a bit of tamarind. They particularly do this in India.
Yes,
just a bit, and not the tamarind paste. That's horrid.
The
pulp. You need a pulp where you put just a tablespoon in just before the end, and it's a little bit like lemon juice, but much better effect. It gives that kind of sour, fruity kind of flavor. It's just. Yeah, these are if you go to an Indian restaurant and think to yourself, why does it taste so much better here? That's why. That's the stuff they do.
Well, and I've also look for restaurants that are not trying to cater to American palates who, Americans don't seem to be able to take spice. And so
Australians can't either.
And so they're
so bland here.
They're so used to getting the food sent back, and so a lot of them are gun shy. They don't want to serve it at the level that it's supposed to be at, for fear that it's just going to be rejected and that it's going to go to waste. So typically, when you go to I judge these Indian restaurants because we have a lot of them in town. I go to almost none of them because most of them are not all that good because they're not spicy enough. They're good flavor, but they're not hot.
The chili does give it a flavor as well as
it does, and you need that.
It's not just about heat.
Correct.
It's more than that.
But this Bangladeshi restaurant, they're kind of funny there because if you go there, and everything is pretty much set at medium. And medium for them is what would be hot for most people. And if you ask them, I like it hot, they make it really hot. If you ask them, can you make it mild? Then they make it as hot as it can go. Because they don't want you to come back.
It's not for you.
It's just not for you. That's how I know I'm at a good restaurant.
I like the ones where they say, this is what it is. You order this or this or this.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Now we do have two other questions which are actually vaguely about religious things. One is with all the important holidays coming, why is Catholic Easter different from Eastern Orthodox Easter? I've always celebrated both. So don't know why.
Okay, that's an easy one.
I'll let you go.
Yeah, that's an easy one. The Catholic Church is on the Gregorian calendar, which most Christian denominations are on Gregorian calendar, but the Orthodox uses the Julian. So it will be off by that with.
By the way, until was it 1728? We all used the Julian calendar.
We did, yeah.
So
the same thing with people they saw me.
Changed, not them.
People saw me on television crossing myself to my right shoulder. And they were complaining.
Yeah, what I do too.
And they complained. They were saying, "Oh, look at he's not a real priest. He can't even cross himself correctly." And I had to come on and say, actually, you guys are not crossing yourself correctly because the original way was to the right shoulder. You're referencing the right hand of God.
And also you're mirroring the priest.
You're mirroring the priest. Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
I can't really find any explanation for why the Church of Rome decided to just go left other than to just be different, I guess. I don't know. But the older way, when the church was unified before 1000, it was to the right.
Of course, the answer is it doesn't matter which way.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't matter. There is no backwards.
Is the right first, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's why change it?
There is a second reason that the Orthodox have a different date for Easter. The main one is the Julian calendar, but they also have a rule that says it cannot be the same weekend as Passover, the Jewish Passover.
The Passover, yes, that's true. Yeah.
Whereas in the West, it sometimes coincides.
It does, yeah. And I kind of like when it coincides, honestly. I kind of like being able to celebrate it with them. Yeah, it feels more complete. makes it extra holy, when you have an entire other population praying with you,
with you.
I mean, they're praying in their own tradition, but it's still, there's power to that. You feel it, sensitive people. Yeah. You feel it, Jamie, you feel it. Yeah. It's nice when that happens. Okay. Yeah. I hope that answered the question. So it's basically just two different calendars. What's the next one?
So not sure. Benefits can be found with fasting before long periods of meditation. Are there methods of meditation that you would recommend?
Well, for a Christian, I recommend centering prayer and Lectio Divina. I think those are the two primary ones that are good for the Christian. So Lectio Divina is really the traditional one. You're not going to find any controversy in the church with that one. That's universally accepted. Centering prayer has kind of fallen out of favor because of its Eastern influence. I knew the founder personally. I knew the founder of centering prayer, Basil Pennington, before he was in his car accident and subsequently died several months later. But I was at a mass with him. He invited me to his monastery, and he was working in China at the time. So a lot of the influence of centering prayer came from his experiences in the Far East, and then Thomas Keating took over as the voice of centering prayer. He's now deceased as well. We had him on the podcast we had at the time, which was years ago, but we had Father Keating on talking about centering prayer, and they were both Carthusians. And I believe out of Snowmass, the Snowmass Monastery, if I'm not the one in Snowmass, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, so let's talk about them. Lectio Divina is a traditional monastic type of prayer that involves taking the scriptures, and sometimes you'll gravitate to something that you want that's relevant to perhaps the season you're in. So if you're like approaching Advent, you might want to read something from the lectionary for the days ahead. Or you can, pick something that's meaningful to you, or you can just randomly open the scripture and just kind of let wherever it falls. And you pick one line, and then you just slowly and deliberately read that line, and then you reread it, and then you reread it, and then you just let the words sort of, as one of the monks once taught me when I was in the monastery, you let the words of the Lectio Divina sort of drip off your tongue like honey. It's almost as if the words themselves are honey, and you're like this bear that's come into the hive and is just consuming it and savoring it. You're savoring the words as you speak them. You're not just reading them. You're not just, comprehending them. You're taking them to a deeper level, and you're doing this slowly and deliberately. And sometimes you might just get stuck on one word and you stay with that word. So it might be like, and Jesus told them, and you'll just go to, and Jesus. And then you just stay with Jesus for a while, and you stay with that. And then maybe 45 minutes later, you've moved on to the next word. You just sort of go with where the Holy Spirit takes you with it. And then there's other ways. There's faster ways. I mean, that's one of the more contemplative versions of Lectio Divina. There's other ways where you can you just meditate, and it takes you into what is known as the next stage. So there's three major types of prayer for the Christian. Okay, there's oratio, which is the prayer that you're most familiar with. That's the oral prayer. That's divine office. That's the liturgical prayers of the Mass. Those are your prayers that you might say at night. That's the Rosary. Although the Rosary is more than just oratio, but oratio is the words. Okay, that's the vocalizations. Okay, that you pray. Sometimes it's just conversational with God. So there's that too. Then there's meditatio. Meditatio is where you take it deeper. Okay, this is where you might take a moment in the life of Christ, and while you're praying, you enter into that moment, and you do this silently. Most monastic prayer, most meditative prayer, is not about speaking. Oratio is a very small part of the prayer life of a monk. Most of it's listening, and most of that listening is done through meditation, and that meditation is focusing on these moments in the life of Christ, or these moments in these key spiritual events that occurred in the Christian story that are relevant to something that you're trying to acquire. So if it's grace that you're looking for, if it's forgiveness you're looking for, you might read a psalm that deals with those subjects. And you start with the Lectio Divina, and then as you slowly and deliberately go through each word in the psalm, you are taking yourself in your mind through the story that you're reading, and you become the story. And that's kind of how that happens. And if it's done well and you make a good connection, then God might gift you with the third part of prayer. Now, the third part of prayer you can't make happen. Only God can make it happen. And that's contemplatio. All right. This is where you get into these ecstatic mystical experiences that people like John of the Cross have talked about. These are extraordinary experiences. You don't go into prayer expecting them. They are gifts strictly from God. And you might only have one or two in your lifetime if you're lucky. You might never get to contemplatio. But Lectio Divina, dedicated oratio, and meditatio can lead there. Centering prayer is kind of in the same vein, but a little bit different. And it employs some of the more Eastern techniques of breathing, okay? So all of this up until this point had nothing to do with looking at your physiology. But in centering prayer, you're getting yourself into a position that is appropriate to the work you must, the work you're about to do. So, you might use the lotus position. I think there are some monks that did, but it's not necessary. I think Father Basil Pennington basically just said to sit comfortably, but feet firmly on the ground, posture correct so that you're not slouching, you're not laying down where you get tired. Lowering your eyes, but not closing them entirely. I hate when I hit this thing. I'm sorry if that was loud. I'm a person that talks with my hands. I need a mic that comes down from the ceiling. I can't have one that's right this close to me because I'm the Italian in me comes out. And so you would have, you don't want to sleep, but you want to lower your eyes and just keep them open enough that you can still see, but you're not focused on anything. And then you start with the breathing. And the breathing is very basic. You breathe in from your abdomen, not from your chest. Most of us are breathing shallow breaths from our chest. In meditation, you want to breathe in from the abdomen. And you want to get that gut, you want to suck that gut in and you want to suck that gut out every single time that you breathe, but slowly and deliberately. And it's in, a slow breath in through the nose. And you just slowly build until you can't anymore. Then you hold it for a few seconds. And then you slowly release through your mouth until you cannot expend any more air. And then you hold it. And then you go back and forth like this. And while you start getting that rhythm going, you will create a focal point. Now, in Buddhism, the focal point is usually your nose or a candle or something in front of you. In centering prayer, it's a word. And that word can be something that you choose at your pleasure, whatever, if the word is Jesus or grace or forgiveness, or it can be a different word. It can be the same word every time. But it's that one word that you come back to. And anytime you get yourself distracted, which is going to happen a lot when you start meditating for the first time, or if you haven't done it in a long time because the monkey brain kicks in, you're not going to beat yourself up over that. What you're going to do is you're going to return to that word. And then that word is your connection point. You resume your breathing. You resume your focus. The focus is always on the word, whatever that word is. And then you just let it take you. You just suspend conscious thought. And then you eventually, once you get good at this, you arrive at a place between thought and distraction. It's like you're awake, but you're not really awake, and you're above the experiential aspect of reality to a point where you're not really conscious, but you're awake in a way that's even more profound and deliberate than what you could possibly achieve. Even with drugs or coffee, cocaine would not be the kind of awakeness you can achieve, because it's a peaceful, it's a focused, it's a mindful awakeness, and yet there's a complete suspension of thought. There's a complete suspension of distraction. And if you do all of a sudden, and you do sometimes even when you're good at this, you get to a point where you start all of a sudden thinking about, oh, did I lock the door? Did I put the food out to thaw for dinner? Whatever. Then you release it. You release that distraction, and you return to your word, return to your breathing, and that you continue that on. These are the best meditation methods for the Christian, in my mind. Now, there's a lot of controversy with centering prayer today, because, you get these exorcists saying that yoga's evil, that yoga's going to, create demonic attachments. There are exorcists that teach this in the Catholic Church, and they would be, they're like most things that Catholics tend to teach. It's incomplete. It's misdirected. It's misdirection. Can yoga create a demonic attachment? Yeah, of course, because any kind of spiritual activity is going to expose your vulnerabilities. But apathy is much worse, and nobody's ever talking about that. Nope. And if you do yoga correctly, then it actually strengthens you once you have gotten beyond your weaknesses, which is your tendency to be distracted, your lack of focus. And then when you are in where the Buddhist is more like trying to dissolve his fundamental properties of awareness to a point that he can sort of descend into a state of bliss where there is really, it's kind of non-reality. Not entirely, it's really kind of like shunyata, which is sort of the best way to describe shunyata is sort of being in an empty room that is filled with sunlight. It's not entirely empty, and yet it is. So it's kind of like that. It's like the light of awareness is present, but yet there is no conscious thought being injected into it for distraction. That's what the Buddhist is trying to achieve. For the Christian, it's union with God. And so that focus allows you to remove the distractions that keep you from experiencing God directly. And this is what I have taught for many years, because you've got all these denominations, 33,000 denominations teaching people about faith. You got to believe, you got to believe, you got to believe. I say, the hell with belief. All right? Belief is irrelevant. It's experience that matters. You don't need belief once you acquire experience. You don't need belief. You don't have to challenge yourself in that way. It's an unnecessary aspect of it. And even belief as it is used in Scripture is not the kind of belief that we think of today, because today we think of belief as in seeing is believing. As if seeing, believing is some kind of proof that something exists. But that's not how the ancients saw belief.
Yeah, it's become propositional. I mean,
it is.
People let it get in the. I mean, I think again, I know Jordan Peterson's one of the people saying this. He says, "Who cares what you believe? Get over yourself."
It doesn't matter.
And I do agree. I think either way, you believe the truths of Christianity, do you? Well, good for you. Or you can't quite believe the truths of Christianity. Oh, well, good for you. Like, who cares?
Who cares?
I mean, honestly, most people have a completely, inflated view of why their opinion matters. Like,
it makes it all about you.
To what extent it matters.
It's another egotism again.
Like, get over your own opinion. Like, your opinion doesn't matter.
No.
It's not to say that your opinion's even wrong or right. It's to say that it's the wrong lens through which to view things. It is. Faith gets you through the door, but even faith is
is more about trusting the process than it is about believing in something. Faith is not. I reject the definition. I firmly reject the definition that faith is knowing something. Is how do they put it? They put it like is believing something is true without the evidence. That's how people tend to use faith. That is not Christian faith. That is not Christian faith. Faith is trusting in the process that what is to be revealed will be revealed. What is yet to be fully understood will be understood according to the will of God. It's trusting in God. Faith is about trust. In fact, you could actually, I think, remove the word faith and put trust in there, and I think it'd be more accurate to the way people understand those words today, because we don't have a correct understanding of faith, and it's misused in the vernacular. So
I think trust is better actually, because it gives a much more concrete commitment to something,
and it's an action. It's an action. It's not.
I'm going to live my life as though this is true.
Yes,
that's what trust is.
That is trust. Yeah,
you know? And that's. I think that's where it comes. I mean, for anybody that's and we've got a few Eastern Orthodox Christians in the chat, which is interesting.
Oh, cool.
For anybody that's dubious about the sort of the breathing techniques when it comes to prayer, especially if you're Eastern Orthodox. Metropolitan Kallistos Ware wrote extensively and lectured extensively on the Jesus prayer as and matched with breathing. Yeah. He lectured me personally on it and was passionate about it. I know for all of his amazing life that he gave a massive contribution to many aspects of the Christian life theologically as well. I know the one that he was actually most proud of. He wouldn't use the word pride, but the most proud of was that work that he did.
When you look at the methods, of theosis that apply to the use of the Jesus prayer as a formula, it is very similar to centering prayer.
Yes.
Is that the Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God,
have mercy on me, a sinner? Yeah, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner.
Right. Yep. That does it. It helps me when I do meditation.
I think it's perfect for it,
right.
But
I do that when I'm practicing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he would, again, he lived in Oxford, so he'd say, you do this whilst you're waiting for the bus.
Yeah. You do it all the time.
It's all the time.
It becomes part of your the reason they connect it to breath is because that's how you can live up to, once you achieve this, once you've gotten past the formula of it, once it becomes natural, sort of like driving a car when you're learning, you've got both hands, white knuckles, and and then now it's like after driving for 30, 40 years, whatever, sometimes you go somewhere that's an hour away and you don't even remember doing it. It's like you just get there and you're like, how did I arrive? You were, and it's all automatic. Prayer can get to that point. The Jesus prayer, theosis, gets us to that point where it becomes so automatic that you're not having to utilize conscious thought anymore. It's happening at a deeper level. And that's how you would attain to praying without ceasing, as St. Paul would have, commanded, and it's part of the monastic formula. And the Eastern monks do it so well. And breath is how it's done, because breath is part of the automatic process, right? So if you can integrate the prayer into the breathing process, then eventually you can achieve to the state of it happening automatically without having to inject conscious thought or attention to it.
The spiritual life is directly connected to the breath.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it in the scriptures. God breathes life into Adam.
Absolutely.
When we talk about exorcism, the demons will leave on the breath.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's through vomiting or choking or coughing, but that's how they eventually get gotten rid of.
Yes.
That when a priest says blessing prayers, they must be said because like when you bless water, for example, you breathe on it.
Yeah.
Now you either breathe on it as a separate act as well as saying the words, or you speak the words directly into the water. Yeah. When we consecrate the chalice and the host at the Mass, we speak the words onto the object.
Yeah.
And so the breath, I mean, inspiration. I mean, all of it's all connected to the words for breath. Holy Spirit, the breath of God. So we should. I mean, it's not surprising that these things alert people, sometimes wrongly in a negative sense, that we connect these things with breathing, but because it is so powerful. But that's exactly the point.
It's a type of yoga. I mean, the breathing techniques that are utilized in Buddhism are carryovers from the yoga practices in Hinduism. And so the breathing techniques, I think it's an aspect of Hatha yoga, is an essential aspect. But it's the way that we can connect with that dichotomy that we talked about earlier with the corporeal and incorporeal parts of our being. We don't, we're losing the stream. Let's see what happens here. No, it's back. See, it's straddling the internet. That's what's causing this to happen. So I apologize. I did not say what I was going to say, so I'll say it now. One thing that bugs me is when people say you are a spiritual being having a human experience. No, that's bullshit. That's total bullshit. You are always and have always been a human spiritual being having a human spiritual experience. They are not dichotomous. They are not in conflict. They have always been a symbiotic experience. And
that phrase is like a Western bullshit Buddhism, right?
It is.
It's those people, you go to Venice Beach, I'm kind of Buddhist. Like, no, you're not.
No, you're not.
You're just a hedonist.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, like these celebrities that, they go and they meet the Dalai Lama.
Your Buddhism. Tell me about your Buddhism, Right. So you don't like Christianity because it's dogmatic. Do you know anything about Buddhism? It's entirely dogmatic.
Yeah.
So, it's just, yeah, right. So that phrase comes from that Venice Beach Buddhist.
I think so. Jamie, what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just laughing.
Oh, I thought you were saying something. No, it's true.
Venice Beach Buddhism, I love it.
The Venice Beach Buddhism, and that's the problem that we see. It comes from, again, New Age thought and all this nonsense, which is a complete misinterpretation of the whole thing. And this thought that the physical, again, it's a little Gnostic, isn't it? The physical is the problem.
Very, very much so.
Yeah, and it's not.
We should probably do a whole show about Gnosticism.
We should,
just to really explain what we mean when we say Gnosticism.
Well, because there's different ways. Because gnosis is a good thing. Even St. Paul talks about gnosis.
We're not anti-knowledge.
No, definitely not. But Gnosticism as a deviant sect, it missed the boat. And now it had some wonderful contributions.
It sure did.
I mean,
but then it went way off in the left field.
Because when you start manipulating Christology, and you start changing the nature of the faith, that is where you stop philosophizing, and then you're now creating a dogmatism that is very dangerous and can lead people astray.
Exactly.
I mean, Gnosticism is a fascinating state. The Nag Hammadi, wonderful text. I have it.
I've got them behind me.
Yeah. Oh, it's
one in my library as well. Yeah.
Not the originals.
Not the originals, but yeah, I have.
It's just there.
I have several copies in different translations. Perfect Thunder, Perfect Mind. It's just a beautiful text and very spiritually powerful. A lot of wisdom there. So Gnosticism, even from the ancient vantage point, is not a bad thing. The bad part was they fell into the trap that the physical world was evil. Mm-hmm. And this idea that they couldn't reconcile the way that the God in the Old Testament, and we can do a show on this, but they couldn't reconcile.
I think it's worth it.
It is. I think so, because there's so much that could be said about it. Yeah, we'll do that for season 7. But briefly, they basically said that because they couldn't reconcile the fact that the God in the Old Testament was so different than the Father of Jesus Christ, at least in perception, that they said that Jesus came to bring us connection to the true God, and that the the God of the Old Testament was really just a God who not a real God, but he thought he was the real God, the demiurge that was accidentally created by Sophia, which is sort of this feminine aspect of God. She accidentally created him, and he thought he was God, so he created the earth, but it's all screwed up because he didn't know what he was doing. And so it changes the Adam and Eve story dramatically to the point that the serpent in the garden, that comes down to say, no, you got to eat of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil because this guy's enslaving you. That's actually Sophia. It's not the devil in the Gnostic theology. It's a fascinating thing. We'll have to do a show on it.
Sophia is holy wisdom.
Right? Holy wisdom, yes. And snakes have been associated with wisdom, the Kundalini, and also the the staff that they use in the barbershop. What's that called? It's on the tip of my tongue. It's on the tip of my tongue. Marina, you're out there. You always have a good memory for these things.
Right.
It's on the tip of my tongue. The caduceus. Thank you. Caduceus.
It was on the sea.
Thank you. That was Mystic. Thank you. Thank you, Mystic. Danielle got it. The caduceus. That serpent energy is a carryover back to Gnosticism. So the devil, the serpent in the temptation was not the bad guy in the Gnostic mythos. That was actually Sophia trying to save us. And then eventually she sends Jesus as an emanation that's related to the same part of God that she emanates from, to then correct all of this and to awaken you to the real God, and that you've been deceived all this time.
Well, the bottom line is that the outcome of it all is to say that nothing of the flesh can be good.
No, and so they
all of this, and therefore the life's journey is about picking up the secret knowledge, so we can escape from the physical life. Yeah,
because we were supposed to always be spiritual.
You can see the hangovers in lots of even I'm not saying they're heretics, contemporary Christians who their visions of what heaven is.
You do. Look at our visions of sex. Look at puritanical views on sex. Yeah. The reason that Christians have such a troubled relationship with sex is because of the Gnostics. Having sex meant you brought more children into the prison. So sex was a bad thing. And that stayed in the church. That continued. Because you look at the Jews love sex. And they talk very, very positively about sex. Sexuality is not a bad thing.
Statistically, they have the most sex. Orthodox Jews.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're not allowed to touch their wives for 15 days a month, but they still have more sex than anybody else.
They take advantage of the moments where they can. Well, hey guys, it's been fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed season 6. It's been such a troubled season. I hope that someday we can get this internet working better so it doesn't stutter, but at least it's not kicking you off. Right. We'll be back probably towards the end of January, beginning of February, when we'll start booking in January new shows. So look on the Nicolean Network and look on the YouTube channel for when those shows start showing up. You'll know when the new season starts. We'll do a lot more than 9 episodes, I can tell you that. We'll go all the way to the summer. So it should be a lot of fun, a lot of topics. Father Chris and I will get together and get some ideas, do Gnosticism, we'll do some theology series. Be a lot of fun. I'll be in England
for some of it as well.
So great.
I'll be in the same time zone as some people.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, anyway, Father Chris, Jamie Wolfe, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Take care, everybody.
And thank all of you for being with us for this season and tuning in, and make sure that, you go to the Nicolean Network so you don't miss anything. You know what's going on, okay? Because we are still going to be doing Mass. And I have a class there, too, if you want to join the class and learn about all this stuff. Anyway, take care, and I'll see you out there in the ether.